What's good, everyone? This is Vision Harry, and boy do we have a treat for you. Remus Lupin arrived at Privet Drive for Harry with James's will. He did not leave without him. Hit subscribe and the bell. Let the story begin. Chapter 1, The Will and the Doorstep. The cottage at Godric's Hollow had stopped burning by the time Remus arrived, but the smoke hadn't cleared. He stood at the garden gate for a long moment, one hand on the rusted iron latch, and looked at what was left. The upper floor was gone, just open sky where a roof used to be, stars indifferent and cold above the wreckage. The ground floor walls still stood, barely. A child's mobile dangled from a broken beam, turning slowly in the November wind, its painted moons and stars catching what little light the street offered. It should have been whimsical. It was the most terrible thing Remus had ever seen. He'd known before he arrived. He'd felt it, that particular silence that falls over a werewolf's senses when someone they love has left the world. Like a frequency dropping out of the air. First James, then Lily, then nothing, then that motorcycle sound overhead and the crack of Sirius's apparition somewhere south of here, and Remus had been running ever since. Running from his flat in London where he'd been sitting with a cup of cold tea and a book he hadn't been reading, because the war made it impossible to concentrate on anything that wasn't the war. He opened the gate. The garden path was scorched. A pumpkin had rolled against the fence post and sat there looking absurd. Remus stepped over a piece of roofing timber and pushed through the front door, which hung at an angle from one hinge, and stood in what had been the sitting room. James was there. Remus had known that too, but knowing and seeing were different things. He stood very still and looked at his friend, at the glasses knocked crooked, at the hair that was exactly as untamable in death as it had always been in life, and felt something inside his chest do something that couldn't be described as breaking because breaking implied something sudden, and this was slower than that. This was geological. Continental plates shifting. James, he said. Just the name. There wasn't anything else. He stood there for a while. He wasn't sure how long. Then he did what James Potter would have done, which was to stop standing still and move. Because somewhere in this house, he could hear it now, a thin, exhausted sound from upstairs, a baby was crying. The stairs were structurally questionable. Remus went up them anyway, testing each step, one hand trailing the wall that was more soot than plaster now. The nursery door was hanging open. The ceiling here had partially collapsed but missed the cot somehow, the way disasters have a horrible randomness to their geometry. Lily was by the door, and Remus didn't look. Couldn't, not yet, because the crying was coming from the cot and he crossed the room and reached in without thinking. Harry was small in a way that wrecked him completely. 14 months old and he had James's dark hair and Lily's green eyes and a smear of ash on his cheek and a cut on his forehead, lightning-shaped and raw and already beginning to do something that a cut on a 14-month-old's forehead had absolutely no business doing, which was glow, faintly, like an ember. "Hello," Remus said. His voice came out steadier than he'd expected. "Hello. I've got you. I've got you." Harry looked at him. Blinked those green eyes. Reached up one small fist and grabbed Remus's finger with surprising strength. Remus sat down on the floor with him right there, because his legs stopped working. He sat against the wall below the window with Harry in his arms and the night wind coming through the hole where the ceiling used to be, and he held James and Lily Potter's son and shook, silently, for a long time. It was Harry who stopped him. The baby made a small, decisive sound, not unhappy, just present, and patted Remus's chest with one open hand, as if to say, "Enough of that, there are things to do." Maybe Remus was projecting. But it worked. He stood up. He looked around the nursery. There was a bag in the corner, half-packed, nappies and a change of clothes for Harry and a folded note on top that said Hospital Wednesday, don't forget his green blanket, are in Lily's handwriting, because they'd had plans for Wednesday, had plans for the rest of their lives, and Remus grabbed the bag and slung it over his shoulder and looked at the room one more time. The wardrobe was still intact. He didn't know why he opened it. Some instinct. On the top shelf, behind a folded green blanket, he grabbed that too. There was a small lockbox. Remus stared at it. The lock had a particular shine to it, the telltale shimmer of magical warding, and the keyhole was engraved with a running stag. His hands were steady as he reached for it. He didn't know why they were steady. Probably because he'd used up whatever capacity he had for trembling. He cast the unlocking charm. Lily had made him the key, of course, because that was the kind of thing Lily did, thought 6 steps ahead and made contingencies for contingencies, and the box opened. Inside was a sealed envelope. On the front, in James's handwriting, Last Will and Testament of James Fleamont Potter. To be opened in the event of my death. Registered with Gringotts Bank, London. If found by Remus John Lupin, you absolute idiot, I told you to check on us sooner. I love you. Read this. Remus read it on the floor of the nursery, with Harry in his lap trying to eat the corner of his green blanket, by the light of a Lumos charm that trembled once and then held steady. It took 6 minutes to read. He sat with it for another 2. Then he folded it very carefully, placed it back in the box, tucked the box into the bag, wrapped Harry in the green blanket, and walked out of the house at Godric's Hollow for the last time, closing the broken door behind him out of pure habit. The cold air hit him like a wall. Harry made a small disapproving sound and burrowed closer. I know, Remus told him. We're going to fix this. He apparat. He arrived in front of number 4, Privet Drive at 11:47 in the evening, which he knew because the church bell down the road was counting midnight as he landed, and he was close enough that he felt the noise in his back teeth. Surrey in November was ugly and grey and had the specific quality of a place that considered itself respectable and was deeply offended by anything that disagreed. The basket was on the doorstep. Remus stopped. He'd apparat to the end of the street and walked, automatically, doing reconnaissance the way the order had trained him, checking for wards and watchers and anything unusual. The street was quiet. The houses were dark. But there was a figure sitting on the low wall across from number 4, a very old man in purple robes, sitting with his legs crossed and his silver beard tucked into his belt, eating something from a paper bag, looking for all the world like he was waiting for a bus. Albus Dumbledore looked up. Remus, he said, and his voice was gentle in the way that expensive things are handled gently. I rather thought you might come. Remus walked up the front path, past the ornamental garden gnome, past the tidily coiled garden hose, up the 3 steps to the front door, and bent down. Harry was in a basket, asleep, bundled in blankets with his cut forehead visible and an envelope tucked beside him. The Hogwarts letter addressed to Mr. H. Potter. The cupboard under the stairs didn't exist yet, but the instinct to put this child under a staircase was woven into this house's future with all the subtlety of a coffin nail, and Remus could feel it the same way he could feel weather changing in his joints. He picked Harry up. Blankets and all, out of the basket, and tucked him against his chest, and straightened up, and turned around. Dumbledore had come to stand at the foot of the steps. He wasn't blocking the way, there was plenty of room, but he was present in the manner of large geography. Immovable. Ancient. Certain of himself the way mountains are certain of themselves. He needs to stay, Remus, Dumbledore said. His eyes were not twinkling. They were very serious, very blue, and very sad in a way that was not the same thing as wrong. The blood wards are Lily's sacrifice, Remus said. Not this house. Not these people. He kept his voice level. Her blood, yes. Her love. Her choice to die for him. That magic lives in Harry, Dumbledore, not in the Dursley's central heating. Dumbledore's expression shifted. Something that might have been surprise, if surprise was something Albus Dumbledore still experienced. You've studied the ward matrix. I've studied everything. Remus shifted Harry slightly. The baby was still asleep, his breath warm and even against Remus's collarbone. I've been studying it since the war started, because Lily told me what she was building when they went into hiding, because she trusted me, and I understand how the magic works. The protection is tied to Harry's blood. His mother's blood. Taking Lily's sister as the location of the ward is your interpretation, Albus. One interpretation. A convenient one for a man who wants Harry kept somewhere small and hidden and uninformed. A man, Dumbledore said quietly, who wants Harry kept alive. Those aren't the same thing. Remus came down the steps. Not aggressively, just to stand on level ground. And there's something else. He reached into the bag with one hand, the other keeping Harry steady, and pulled out the lockbox. He set it on the garden wall and opened it and took out the will and held it out. Dumbledore looked at it. Didn't take it. I've seen James's will, he said. Then you know what it says. I know what it says, Dumbledore agreed. And I respect James's wishes enormously. But the situation has changed, the will is registered with Gringotts. Remus folded it back up. His voice still hadn't risen. He was mildly surprised by this. It was filed 2 years ago, cross-referenced with the Wizarding Guardianship Act of 1943, and notarized by 3 goblin witnesses. It names me, by full name, as Harry's magical guardian in the event of James and Lily's deaths. It supersedes your authority. It supersedes the Ministry's default protocols. It doesn't ask for your agreement, because James knew, Albus, that you might decide his son was more useful as a symbol than as a person. The word symbol landed between them like a stone in still water. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. He looked at Harry, asleep in Remus's arms, oblivious to the fact that his entire life was being negotiated on a Surrey doorstep by 2 tired men who both loved him for very different reasons. You are a werewolf, Dumbledore said. Not cruelly. As a fact. The Ministry will not, the Ministry, Remus said, will deal with a Gringotts registered will, a lycanthropic guardian who has broken no laws and served the Order of the Phoenix with distinction, and the full legal weight of James Potter's written wishes. Or they can explain to every surviving Order member why they're trying to override a dead man's will to put his son with Muggle relatives who, he paused. Have you met these people, Albus? I have a sense, Petunia Evans, Remus said, once told Lily that she was a freak. She told her every day for the better part of their shared childhood. I know this because Lily told James, and James told Sirius, and Sirius told me because we didn't have secrets, the 4 of us, we didn't keep things from each other. His voice did something it hadn't done yet, went tight, briefly, at the edges. These are not safe people. Not for a magical child. Not for any child. He would be, if you tell me he would be loved, I will ask you for your evidence. Remus tucked the will back into the box and the box back into the bag. And if you can't provide any, I'm going to walk to the end of this street and disapparate, and by morning Harry will be registered with Gringotts as my ward, and there will be nothing you or the Ministry or the Wisengamot can do about it that won't make an extraordinary amount of political noise. Which I'm sure you'd like to avoid. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The church bell had finished counting midnight. The street was absolutely silent except for the occasional passing car, headlights sweeping past with that particular Muggle indifference to magic that Remus had always found oddly comforting. He is destined for something, Remus, Dumbledore said finally. There is a prophecy, I know about the prophecy. Remus saw Dumbledore's eyebrows rise. Dorcas Meadows told Caradoc Dearborn, who told Emmeline Vance, who told no one but was stood next to Frank Longbottom when she thought it through, and Frank Longbottom has never had a poker face. I am very good at reading people, Albus. I have had to be. He let that sit for a moment. I know what Harry may have to face. I am not hiding him from it. I am preparing him for it. There is a difference. There is an enormous difference. And you believe you can do that? Alone? A werewolf with no job, no home. No, I have a home, Remus said. I've had a cottage in Scotland for 6 years, it's warded 7 ways and sits on ley lines that would make your Hogwarts wards look like rope and good intentions. I have a network of friends who survived the war and who owe me enough favors to fill a book. I have James's estate, which Gringotts will release to Harry's guardian, to me, once I file the papers. He looked directly at Dumbledore. I'm not asking for your help. I'm informing you of what's happening. Because James respected you, and I respected James, and that's the only courtesy I owe you tonight. Dumbledore was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Then he did something Remus hadn't expected. He reached out, slowly, and touched Harry's head, just barely, just the tips of his fingers against the dark hair, and his expression went somewhere private and old and genuinely grieved. He looks like James, he said quietly. Yes, Remus said. He does. James was one of the finest students I ever taught. I know. I am not, Dumbledore withdrew his hand. I am not your enemy in this, Remus. I want what is best for the boy. I know you believe that. Remus met his eyes steadily. But what's best for Harry and what's best for your plan might not be the same thing. And I need you to understand that I will always choose Harry. He paused. If it comes to it. The old man looked at him, really looked, in that way he had that felt like being read, and then he nodded once. A small, precise movement. Concession without agreement. The Blood Ward concern is real, Dumbledore said. I want you to know that. It is not fabricated to suit my purposes. There will be those who seek him. I know how to hide, Remus said. Better than most. I've been hiding my whole life. He meant it without bitterness. Just truth. I'll ward the cottage. I'll maintain a secondary safe location. I'll be in contact with you when it's relevant. A beat. Not the other way around. Dumbledore almost smiled. Almost. You've thought this through. I've had about 4 hours. I think remarkably well under pressure. Remus bent and picked up the empty basket from the doorstep, because it seemed wasteful to leave it, and tucked it under his arm. Good night, Albus. I'm sorry for James. I know you loved him too. He said it simply and sincerely, because it was true, and then he walked down the garden path and through the gate, which he closed neatly behind him, and he didn't look back. He walked to the end of Privet Drive, turned the corner, and stood in the shadow of a large oak tree that had shed most of its leaves. Harry stirred in his arms and made a small noise, and Remus looked down at him. The streetlight filtered through the bare branches and fell across Harry's face, and his eyes were open now, Lily's eyes, wide and green and blinking with the calm, focused curiosity that very small children have when they aren't distressed. Right, Remus said softly. So. I'm Remus. I was your dad's best friend. I was your mum's friend too, for what that's worth, and she scared me more than he did, which is, she'd have liked that, actually. She'd have found that very funny. He paused. I'm going to take you somewhere safe. And then we're going to figure out the rest. Harry reached up and grabbed a fistful of Remus's coat. Good, Remus said. Hold on, then. He turned on his heel and they vanished. The Ministry of Magic at 3 in the morning had a particular quality: empty corridors and the hum of maintenance charms and the handful of night shift workers who existed in that gray zone of minor bureaucratic importance. Remus walked through the entrance with Harry in the bag slung on his back, transfigured briefly into a rucksack because that was practical, and went straight to the Gringotts liaison office on the second sublevel, because Gringotts maintained a 24-hour representative office in the Ministry building for exactly these kinds of purposes. The goblin behind the desk was named Ragnarok, and he looked at Remus with the patient contempt that goblins reserve for everyone, and said, Lupin. We expected you earlier. I had to make a stop, Remus said. The will. Yes. We received the notification of the Potter's deaths at midnight, Ragnarok said, pulling out a ledger. The clause activates automatically upon verification of both deaths, which we completed at, he squinted at the entry, 12:09. He looked at Remus. You are 23 minutes late. My sincerest apologies. Ragnar made a sound that was not a laugh but might have been in a different species. He placed 3 forms on the desk. Sign here, here, and initial here. The Potter estate transfers to your guardianship on behalf of the ward. The relevant vaults will be accessible to you upon presentation of this documentation. The protective properties of the will activate upon filing. He paused. The headmaster of Hogwarts contacted us at 12:15. Of course he did, Remus said, and signed. We informed him that the will was valid and registered and that any attempt to contest it through ministry channels would be considered an interference with Gringotts registered documentation. Ragnar's expression didn't change, but something in his tone was deeply satisfied. Goblins, Remus had always thought, had a particular appreciation for watching wizards lose arguments. He did not contest further. Excellent. Remus initialed the 3rd form. What about the child's magical guardian status, is that registered now? As of your signature, yes. Harry James Potter, ward of Remus John Lupin. Ragnar stamped the ledger with a sound that echoed in the empty office. There is also the matter of an owl from 1S Black, filed 2 months ago. Remus went very still. It was filed as a contingency, Ragnar said, in the manner of someone who finds emotional responses faintly inefficient. In the event of the deaths of James and Lily Potter, Black's will, also Gringotts registered, states that guardianship should default to Lupin in the event that Black himself is incapacitated or deceased. Sirius isn't, the word stuck. He's not dead. No. He is not dead. Ragnar met his eyes. He is in Azkaban. The office was very quiet. Remus set both palms on the desk. He looked at the goblin. He hasn't had a trial. He has not. He was arrested without a trial. That is the record, yes. Under what provision? Emergency wartime protocols. Ragnar paused, which from a goblin was practically a theatrical gesture. Protocols which, notably, have a statutory review clause requiring a formal hearing within 1 year of the armistice or the prisoner must be formally charged or released. Remus looked at him for a long moment. And the armistice was last night. Technically at 11:53 p.m. Meaning the review clock starts, immediately, Ragnar said. Meaning Mr. Black has the right to request a formal hearing before the Wisengamot within 365 days of last night. Should no hearing be granted, he must be released. He folded his hands on the desk. Gringotts is not a legal firm, Mr. Lupin. We simply keep excellent records. Remus stood up straight. Something had changed in him in the last few hours, some dial had turned that he wasn't fully aware of yet, some recalibration of what he was willing to do and how far he was willing to go. Grief did that sometimes. It burned away the soft parts and left something harder underneath. I'll need copies of everything, he said. The guardianship filing, the estate transfer, Sirius's contingency filing, and the statutory review provision. Ragnar was already printing them. We anticipated this, he said simply. Remus almost smiled. You know, for a species that hates wizards, we do not hate wizards, Ragnar said. We find them comprehensively irritating and frequently illegal. It is not the same thing. He slid the documents across the desk. The Potter heir has woken up, he added, nodding at the rucksack. Remus swung it round. Harry was indeed awake, blinking at the Gringotts representative office with the same focused curiosity he'd turned on Remus earlier, apparently undisturbed by the late hour, the bureaucratic surroundings, or the fact that his entire life had just been legally redirected. He reached for the edge of the desk and grabbed it. Strong grip, Ragnar observed. He got that from his father, Remus said, and didn't let himself feel the weight of that sentence until he was out of the building. He reached the cottage in Scotland just before dawn. It sat on a low hillside above a loch, a stone building that was older than the word cottage suggested, with thick walls and a slate roof and a garden that was somewhat feral but in a way that suggested it had made a deliberate choice about that. Remus had bought it 6 years ago with money left to him by his mother and the careful savings of a man who'd learned early that security had to be built because no one was going to hand it to you. He'd warded it himself, layer by careful layer, research and spell work that had taken months. Not glamour charms and motion detectors, proper, structural wards. The kind that made the cottage absent to anyone who didn't know it was there. The kind that meant that when he crossed the threshold with Harry in his arms and a bag on his shoulder and the first grey light coming over the hills, the silence that fell over him was actual silence. Clean and absolute and safe. He stood in the small front hallway and breathed. Harry, who had been increasingly interested in the transition from open air to enclosed space, made a small exploratory sound and turned his head, and his eyes landed on the framed photograph on the hallway table. A moving photograph, for young men in their early 20s, bright-eyed and grinning, Remus in the corner looking exasperated in the particular way he'd perfected during 7 years of being their friend, and James in the middle with his arm round Sirius's neck, both of them laughing at something off-frame, and Peter on the end waving. Harry made a sound that could almost have been recognition. "That's your dad," Remus said quietly. "The one making a spectacle of himself, which, yes, that's accurate. And that's Sirius, who's your godfather and who is going to get out of where he is if I have to personally take apart Azkaban stone by stone. And that's me, looking reasonable by comparison, which is something of a first." He moved into the sitting room. "And Peter, who?" he stopped. "We'll talk about Peter later. When you're older. When I've decided what to say about it. There would be a lot of things to say later. About all of it." Remus had always believed in the approach his mother had taken with him regarding his lycanthropy: tell the truth, tell it age-appropriately, and tell it from a place of stability rather than fear. He would do the same with Harry. The war, the parents, the prophecy, the scar, all of it, in time, from a foundation of safety rather than as a sudden devastating revelation on a train or a bedside. He set Harry down on the sitting room rug with a cushioned barricade around him, improvised engineering, but effective, and went to the kitchen and put the kettle on because there had to be some concession to normalcy. While he waited for the kettle he stood at the kitchen window and watched the sun come up over the loch. The water went from black to grey to silver to something that had no right to be as beautiful as it was, given the night that had preceded it. James was dead. Lily was dead. Peter had betrayed them, that sat inside him like something sharp and foreign, too big to process tonight. That would have to wait. Everything that required actual falling apart would have to wait, because there was a 14-month-old on his sitting room rug who was currently, from the sounds of it, attempting to eat a cushion. The kettle boiled. Remus made tea. He found the powdered infant formula that he'd bought, not recently, but kept, because he'd been the kind of person who did things like that without letting himself think too hard about why, and sorted out a bottle, and went back to the sitting room where Harry had indeed removed the cushion barricade by the straightforward method of tipping it over and was sitting in the middle of the rug looking extremely pleased about this. "Competent," Remus said, and sat cross-legged on the floor beside him. Harry drank his bottle with great seriousness, both small hands wrapped around it, green eyes moving around the room with that cataloguing focus. The sitting room had books on 3 walls, and a fireplace, and a window with the loch view, and maps pinned to one wall that were covered in the color-coded notation of the war and were going to need to come down and be replaced with something more appropriate to a child's environment. "We'll redecorate," Remus told him. Harry made a sound that was clearly agreement. "I should warn you," Remus said, "that I am a werewolf. You'll have to know that. It means that once a month I'm going to need to make specific arrangements, and we'll manage that. I've managed it for 20 years and I'll manage it now, but you should know. Because you deserve to know things about the person who's supposed to look after you." He paused. "Your dad knew, and it made absolutely no difference to him. Wouldn't have made any difference to your mum either, because she was frightening in good and equal measure and she didn't have much patience for unkind instincts." He looked down at Harry. "In case you're worried. Which you're not, because you're 14 months old and still learning the concept of object permanence." Harry had finished the bottle and was now leaning against Remus's knee, apparently done with the effort of sitting independently, which was fair enough. Remus looked at the documents Ragnarok had given him. The guardianship filing. The estate transfer. The statutory review provision for Sirius. He spread them on the floor beside him and read through them again in the early morning light, and the shape of the next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, began to come into focus. There was an enormous amount of work to do. There were letters to write, to the solicitors handling James's estate affairs, to the order members who'd survived, to Dumbledore outlining the formal terms of his communication with Harry's guardian, to the Ministry's Department of Magical Creatures requesting the standard monthly registry check that his lycanthropy required and which he was going to meet with complete compliance because he could not give anyone grounds to question his guardianship, not for a single moment. To the Wisengamot's records office regarding Sirius's right to a hearing. There was a baby to raise. There was a world that had just lost its war and didn't know what to do with itself to navigate. Remus stacked the documents neatly, held them in his hands for a moment. Outside the window the loch was fully golden now, ridiculous in its beauty, the hills reflected in still water. He thought about James on that garden path in Godric's Hollow, and the glasses knocked crooked, and the hair. He thought about Lily by the nursery door and the way she positioned herself, facing the door, between whatever had come through it and Harry's cot, and the courage of that, the absolute specific courage of that one choice, standing between your child and death with nothing but yourself. He thought about the letter inside the will. I told you to check on us sooner. I love you. Read this. He had read it. He had read, Remus, if you're reading this then the worst has happened and I need you not to fall apart yet. Fall apart later. For now, get my son. Get Harry. Don't let Dumbledore put him somewhere dark. He's going to try. He loves Harry in his way but he loves the idea of Harry more, and Harry deserves better than that. You know the cottage. You know how to do this. You know how to build a life despite everything, you've been doing it your whole life. Do it for my kid. Make him know he's loved. Make him know who his parents were. Make him brave and good and take no nonsense from anyone, including you. He's going to be extraordinary, Remington. He already is. You'll see. There's money in the Gringotts vault, access is yours as guardian, don't argue with me about it. Sirius is going to lose his mind with grief, which means he's going to do something stupid, which means he might need your help. Do that too. I know it's a lot. You're the only one I trust with it. Don't be lonely. Be difficult instead. It suits you better. James. Remus folded the letter and put it in his breast pocket, close to his chest, where it had been since Godric's Hollow. Harry had fallen asleep against his knee. Remus looked at him for a long time, the dark hair, the green eyes closed now, the small even breaths, the scar on his forehead that was already fading from raw to something it would carry for the rest of its life. This child who didn't know yet what had happened, what was coming, what his name meant in the world outside this cottage. He would know, eventually. All of it. But not today. Today Remus conjured a blanket from the armchair and laid it over him and sat with his back against the sofa watching the gold on the lock go wide, and drank his tea, and made a list in his head of every single thing he was going to do for this child, every preparation and precaution and lesson and meal and story and every single protection it was within his considerable and underestimated power to provide. It was a very long list. He had plenty of time. He had the rest of their lives. 3 days later, an owl arrived from Dumbledore. A single line, on plain parchment, in that familiar Lupin hand. I hope you'll keep me informed of his progress. Remus turned it over, found his quill on the desk between a legal brief and a feeding schedule and a preliminary ward assessment for secondary defensive enchantments, and wrote on the back, I'll tell him everything. Including about you. That seems fair. He sent it back before he could second-guess himself. Harry, from his spot on the rug where he was systematically testing whether various objects could be inserted into a wooden box, made a sound of approval. I thought you'd agree, Remus said. Chapter 2, Wolves don't abandon their pack. The first thing Harry Potter ever broke with magic was a mug. It was Remus's favorite mug, dark blue with a small chip on the handle, bought from a market in Edinburgh 7 years ago for 50 pence because Remus had always had an instinct for objects that looked like they'd had a good life before him. Harry was 18 months old, sitting in his high chair with porridge he'd decided was beneath him, and the mug was on the counter, and then it wasn't on the counter. It was in Harry's hands. He hadn't moved. Hadn't reached. Hadn't made a sound. The mug had simply relocated, and when Remus turned from the stove and saw it, he stood very still for a moment and then said, "James Potter, even from beyond the grave, to the ceiling." Harry dropped the mug on the tray of the high chair, where it didn't break, it bounced, which was suspicious, and went back to the porridge. Remus wrote it down in the notebook he'd started the week they arrived. 18 months. Accidental summoning. Target, my favorite mug. Motivation, boredom, presumably. He'd been keeping the notebook partly as practical documentation and partly because he thought that someday Harry might want to read it. The kind of thing Remus had never had, a record of himself from before he was old enough to make records. He got a new favorite mug. He didn't try very hard to replace it. The cottage settled into them the way a place does when it's truly lived in. The maps came down from the wall and were replaced first with nothing and then gradually with things more suitable, a hand-drawn map of the loch in all its seasonal variations, because Harry became fixated on the water with an intensity Remus found touching, and some of Remus's own sketches, and eventually Harry's artwork, which in the early years was abstract in the way that children's art is abstract, which is to say entirely committed to itself. The wards went up properly through the winter of 1981 and into 1982, Remus working methodically through the layered enchantments with the same systematic focus he'd applied to everything from his school exams to his monthly transformations. He'd kept notes on ward theory for years, the way a man carries an umbrella in a country with uncertain weather. He expanded on what was there, deepened the concealment charms, added detection layers that would alert him to anyone approaching within a half-mile perimeter, and bound 3 specific counter-jinxes into the door threshold that would activate on hostile intent. Dumbledore sent a ward consultant from Hogwarts in February, a polite Scotswoman named Elspeth who walked the perimeter with a measuring instrument and then came back to the kitchen with an expression that couldn't quite decide whether to be impressed or affronted. "These are adequate," she told Remus. "I know," he said, and handed her tea. She looked at Harry, who was sitting on the floor assembling and disassembling a wooden puzzle with the focused efficiency of a miniature engineer. "He seems well," she said, as if she'd expected otherwise. "He's excellent," Remus said, without heat, because she wasn't being cruel, just surprised, and surprise he could work with. She left and filed a report that said the cottage was well protected and the child appeared healthy and the guardian showed no signs of instability. He knew because Dumbledore sent him a copy, with a brief note that said she was complimentary, for Elspeth, and Remus filed it in the folder he'd started for exactly this kind of documentation. He was going to be documented. He accepted this. He was going to be watched and assessed and second-guessed at every juncture because he was a werewolf raising the most famous child in wizarding Britain, and the world was going to look for any reason to intervene. So he gave them none. The Wisengamot refused the first request for a hearing. The letter came in March, 1982, dense with legal language that essentially said wartime emergency protocols are still under review and no determination regarding prisoner status has been made. Remus read it twice, set it on the desk, and wrote back within the hour. The reply was longer than the letter, 7 pages of statutory reference, precedent citations, and a final paragraph that was so precisely and thoroughly pointed that it constituted, by any fair reading, an act of written aggression. He sent a copy to Gringotts. Ragnarok, who was handling the Potter estate accounts and had apparently decided that Remus was one of the least irritating wizards he'd encountered, forwarded it to the Gringotts legal division with a note that said they would be watching the matter. The ministry did not immediately respond. They would, eventually. Remus was prepared to have this argument indefinitely. He didn't tell Harry about Sirius yet. Not because he intended to hide it, he intended to tell him everything. He'd made James that promise without James asking for it, but because the right age for the concept of unjust imprisonment was not 2 years old. He told Harry about Sirius the person. The godfather. The friend. He told stories over dinner and during the long summer evenings when they sat on the cottage steps and watched the light change on the lock. Sirius Black, who could transform into a massive black dog and regularly had, usually for the worst possible reasons. Sirius Black, who had once bet James that he could eat an entire Christmas pudding and lost with tremendous dignity. Sirius Black, who had a laugh like a firecracker and a heart that was as loyal as anything Remus had ever known, which was why the possibility of the thing people were saying about him, that he'd given the Potters to Voldemort, that he'd been the spy, cracked something in Remus that had never fully healed. Because Remus believed he'd been wrong. The belief had been building since that first night at Gringotts when Ragnarok had mentioned the contingency will. In the event of Black's incapacitation. Written 2 months before the Potters died. Sirius had known something was coming, had planned for it, had named Remus as backup. That wasn't the behavior of a traitor. He didn't have proof yet. Proof was harder. Proof was what he was going to spend years building, one document at a time. Harry walked at 14 months, which was within normal range, and talked at 16, which was early, and had opinions at approximately 17, which was frankly ahead of schedule. By the time he was 2 he had a comprehensive collection of words including more, no, Mooney, which he'd gotten from the photograph on the hallway table, where Remus had eventually written all their names in small letters across the bottom, and which Harry had decoded with the specific determination of someone who intended to know things, and, with some frequency, book. The books came early because Remus was constitutionally incapable of not reading, and Harry, in the way of children who grow up in houses full of a thing, treated them as furniture. He had board books first, then picture books, then the ones with chapters, and Remus read to him every night without exception, not the sanitized editions but the actual stories, the ones with genuine stakes, real fear, real courage. He believed, without having ever been told it and without needing to be, that children who are given real stories build real inner lives. He also told Harry about his parents from the beginning. Not the story, not the famous version, James and Lily Potter who died so their son could live, but James and Lily. The people. Lily who had grown up Muggle-born and come into the magical world at 11 with her eyes open and her mind sharper than anyone in her year, who had been furious at injustice with a specificity that meant she didn't just disapprove of it, she dismantled it. James who was brilliant and showboaty and generous to a fault, who had protected people because it was the right thing and also because he genuinely enjoyed the confrontation, who had loved his friends with a fidelity that was almost old-fashioned. Were they scared? Harry asked once. He was 3, sitting on Remus's lap in the reading chair while rain came against the window, and he asked the way children ask important questions, without preamble. Yes, Remus said. Very scared. Brave people usually are. Were you scared? Every day of the war. Harry considered this. But you're not scared now. Not right now, Remus said. Right now I'm quite comfortable. Harry seemed satisfied with this. He went back to the picture book in his lap, which was about a dragon who had very specific ideas about her hoard and was not wrong about any of them. Remus's monthly transformations were the one thing he hadn't fully solved. He'd been managing his lycanthropy since the age of 4 with the particular self-sufficiency of someone who had no alternative. As a child it had been the Shrieking Shack and later, at Hogwarts, the Marauders, and that period of his life, those 7 years of not being alone in it, had been so much better than anything before or after that he'd spent the years since in a kind of muted grief about their loss. The Wolfsbane potion wasn't available yet. Wouldn't be for years. He transformed monthly into something with no conscience and no restraint, and the only reliable solution was containment. He'd built the containment into the cottage before Harry arrived. An outbuilding, 30 feet from the main house, warded to muffle sound and reinforced with enchantments that had taken him 2 months of careful spellwork. Once a month, for 3 nights around the full moon, he had arrangements. In the early years those arrangements involved a network of people who owed him trust. Emmeline Vance came in the first year, staying in the cottage with Harry while Remus was in the outbuilding, sitting up with a book and apparently entirely unbothered by the sounds that came through. "I've been in the order," she told him once. "I've heard worse. Elphia's Doge came twice. Minerva McGonagall came once, didn't comment on anything, read Harry 3 chapters of the Tales of Beedle the Bard with complete seriousness, and left a tin of Scottish shortbread on the counter." Harry understood from early on that Moony, the name had stuck, had become the word for this version of Remus, which Remus found unexpectedly moving, was something that happened monthly and required accommodation. He explained it the way his mother had explained his own lycanthropy to him, when he was small. "There is a thing that happens to me and it's part of how I was made and it doesn't make me different from myself, but it means we make certain plans." He said it simply and Harry received it simply, because children take their cues from the adults around them, and Remus never treated it as a catastrophe. That said, Harry was 5 when he first heard the transformation sounds from the garden where he'd wandered after Emmeline had fallen asleep in the armchair, and when Remus came out of the outbuilding at dawn he found Harry sitting on the garden wall, wrapped in his blanket, perfectly calm. "Are you all right?" Remus asked. He was tired the way he was always tired on the other side of a transformation, hollowed out and aching, but the alarm in his chest overrode it. "I wanted to check you were okay," Harry said. Remus sat next to him on the wall. "I'm fine. Sweetheart, you should have been inside. Emmeline's asleep." "Yes, I know, but I wasn't scared," Harry said, with the clarity of someone reporting a fact. "I knew you were in there. I just wanted to be close." Remus looked at him for a moment. The dawn light was coming over the hills, early and pale and cold for May. Harry's dark hair was wild from sleep and he had his blanket pulled up to his chin and he was looking at Remus with Lily's eyes and James's stubbornness and something that was entirely his own. "Next time," Remus said carefully, "you wake Emmeline first." "Yes, Moony." "And you stay inside." "Yes, Moony. I mean it." "I know," Harry said, and leaned against his side. Remus wrapped one arm around him and they sat on the garden wall while the sun came up and the lock went golden and Remus thought about what it meant to be loved by someone who was not afraid of you. He'd only ever had that from James and Sirius and he'd thought he'd lost it at Godric's Hollow. Apparently not. He was fighting 2 wars simultaneously, which was manageable only because he was very organized. The first was the quiet daily war of being a werewolf raising a child in a world that disapproved. The Ministry's Department of Magical Creatures sent an annual inspector, someone different each year, always with that particular combination of officiousness and discomfort, and Remus let them in, offered them tea, answered their questions, and showed them a child who was healthy and articulate and clearly well-loved. And each year they filed a report that said everything was in order because everything was in order and even a ministry inspector couldn't argue with evidence. He kept a file of every single one. The second war was serious. 3 hearing requests had been denied by the end of 1983. The fourth, in early 1984, prompted a reply from the Wisengamot that included a citation of the emergency wartime protocols that was so legally tenuous that Remus sent it to a Muggle barrister friend of his, one of the small network of people who knew about the magical world by virtue of being connected to it, to confirm he wasn't imagining it. "Genuinely astonishing," the barrister wrote back. If this were a Muggle court they'd have released the man 3 times over. The 5th request included that assessment. By 1985, Remus had attracted the attention of a wizarding solicitor named Millicent Burrows, who was 63 years old, had argued 13 cases before the Wisengamot, lost 2, and found the black matter professionally offensive, which was how she put it when she wrote to offer her services pro bono. "Why?" Remus asked her, in her cluttered office in Diagon Alley, Harry sitting beside him drawing horses on the back of a legal brief. "Because I've read your submissions," she said, "and you argue well for an amateur, and because a man was put in prison for 12 years without a trial and that is a stain on this entire system that I intend to remove before I retire." She looked at Harry. "Is that James Potter's boy?" "Yes," Remus said. "He looks like him." She said it with the tone of someone who had met James Potter and was not surprised. "Your horses are very good," she told Harry. "Thank you," Harry said, without looking up. Burrows looked at Remus. "I'll have the next filing ready by Thursday." They filed in November 1985. The Wisengamot assigned a hearing date for the following spring, and then postponed it, and then postponed it again, and Remus kept a calendar on the study wall where he crossed off days with the patience of a man who had decided that patience was a weapon and he intended to use it. Harry started reading independently at 4 and reading well at 5, which meant that by 6 he was tearing through Remus's bookshelves with the systematic approach of someone trying to read everything before someone told him he couldn't. He asked questions constantly, good questions, the kind that came from someone who was actually thinking rather than just filling silence, and Remus answered all of them honestly. Including, at 6 years old, the question about Voldemort. It came because Harry found, in the back of the third shelf, a book of magical history that included a chapter on the First Wizarding War. He brought it to Remus at breakfast with the page open and a finger on the relevant paragraph, and said, "Is this about me?" "Come sit down," Remus said. He told him. The full version, age-appropriate but honest, the war, the Potters in hiding, the night at Godric's Hollow, the scar. He told it quietly and factually and watched Harry absorb it with the particular careful attention he gave to things that mattered. When it was done, Harry was quiet for a moment. "Where's Voldemort now?" he asked. "We don't know. Gone. Diminished. Possibly nothing but a remnant. But possibly not." "Possibly not," Remus agreed. "No softening. No, it'll be fine. Just truth." Harry looked at the scar on his own forehead in the kitchen window's reflection, then looked at Remus. "Is that why you got me? The will?" "I got you because your dad asked me to, and because I loved your parents, and because you're Harry and there was never a version of that night where I left you on a doorstep." A pause. "The will made it legal. The wanting was separate." Harry nodded slowly. Then, "And Sirius? Is he coming?" Burrows said the hearing is scheduled for April, Remus said. "We're working on it." "But you think he didn't do it?" "I know he didn't do it." Harry's eyes narrowed slightly, with that look he had, James's look, that meant he was putting pieces together. "Who did?" "Peter Pettigrew," Remus said. And then he told that story too, because Harry deserved all of it, every piece, and Remus was not in the business of building his world on omissions. Harry was very quiet for a long time after that. "I met Peter," Remus said. "I knew him for 7 years. I would have said," he stopped. "People are sometimes not what you think they are. That's why you pay attention. That's why you watch how someone behaves when things are difficult, not easy. Easy tells you nothing. What does difficult tell you? Everything." Harry sat with that. Then he went back to his breakfast with the decisive air of someone who has filed information away appropriately. He was 6 years old and he had a quality that Remus was still getting used to, which was the quality of being genuinely ready for things. Not unaffected by them, not unmoved, but ready. James had had it too. Lily more so. Harry had both of theirs. April 1986. The hearing was real. It was actually happening. Millicent Burrows arrived at the cottage the night before with 3 briefcases and a face that suggested she'd been awake for the last 48 hours on principle, and she and Remus went through the materials at the kitchen table while Harry, who had been put to bed and had ignored this, sat on the stairs and listened. "You should be asleep," Remus said, without turning around. "I'm supporting you," Harry said. From the stairs. Best location. Burrows made a sound that was absolutely a laugh, very briefly. She covered it with a cough. "The central argument," she said, returning to her notes, "is the illegal detention clause, no hearing within statutory period, which we've demonstrated 4 times over, combined with the insufficiency of the original arrest documentation, which is so thin as to constitute nothing whatsoever, and corroborated by the will filings that demonstrate Black's own preparations for contingency." She tapped the relevant page. The prosecution's case rests entirely on eyewitness accounts from Aurors who saw Black in the aftermath, raving, they said. Laughing. Remus said nothing. A man who has just watched his best friends die and realized what's happened, Burroughs said, not without gentleness, laughing at a street full of dead bodies and no explanation, that's grief, not guilt. I'll argue that. She paused. Do you expect Dumbledore to testify? He'll support the hearing. He told me so. A beat. He won't commit to an opinion on Sirius's guilt. Burroughs absorbed this. Neutral ground. Better than opposed. She went back to her notes. Harry came down the stairs, silently, and sat in the armchair in the corner with his knees pulled up and his eyes moving between Remus and the documents on the table, and Remus let him stay because sometimes you let the people you love be present for the things that matter. The hearing was in the Wisengamot chamber at 9 in the morning. Burroughs spoke for 40 minutes and didn't raise her voice once and cited 17 precedents and asked exactly 2 questions that the prosecution couldn't adequately answer. The first was why no trial had been held in 4 years. The second was whether anyone had actually investigated Peter Pettigrew's body, to which the answer was, catastrophically for the prosecution, no. The Wisengamot deliberated for 2 hours. Remus sat in the corridor outside the chamber on a hard bench with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded together and stared at the floor. Harry was with Emmeline back at the cottage. He'd wanted to come and Remus had said no, and Harry had argued the point with impressive coherence for a 5-year-old before accepting the verdict with the grace of someone who had decided to pick his battles, which was, Remus reflected, a better emotional regulation strategy than most adults managed. Burroughs came out of the chamber. Her face did something complicated. Relief fighting with professional composure, relief winning. Not guilty, she said. Insufficient evidence, unlawful detention, immediate release ordered. She paused. There'll be an inquiry into the original arrest procedure. Crouch is going to have a difficult few months. Remus stood up. He was not aware of doing it. He's being released now. Processing takes 4 to 6 hours. They'll bring him through the secure exit into the ministry atrium. Right, Remus said. His voice was very calm and he didn't know why. Right. He sat back down on the bench because the alternative was doing something undignified, and Burroughs sat beside him and said nothing because she was a very good solicitor and also, apparently, an excellent judge of when silence was what was needed. Sirius came through the secure exit at 3:30 in the afternoon. He was thinner than Remus remembered. Obviously, 4.5 years in Azkaban did things to a person that couldn't be entirely undone at the door. He was gray in places he hadn't been gray before, and his cheekbones were sharp in a way that made Remus's chest hurt, and he walked like he'd forgotten he was allowed to take up space. But he was upright. He was walking. And when he came through that door and saw Remus standing in the atrium, just standing there, coat on, hands at his sides, he stopped. They looked at each other across the atrium floor. Sirius's face did something that moved through about 6 different things before landing on something Remus couldn't name. His mouth opened and closed. You look terrible, Remus said. His voice worked. He was mildly surprised. Sirius let out a breath that was almost a laugh. You, yeah. Yeah, he stopped. Harry. He's home. He's safe. He's 5 years old and he draws horses constantly and he already argues better than most adults I know. Sirius walked across the atrium and Remus met him halfway and they stood there for a moment, and then Sirius grabbed the front of his coat and Remus put both arms round him and held on hard, the way you hold someone when you've been afraid for 4.5 years that you'd never get to again. James, Sirius said, against his shoulder. Not a question. Just the name. I know, Remus said. I couldn't think about it, I had to not think about it, I know. Peter, I know. Remus held on. I know. We'll get to all of it. Later. There's time. You're out. Sirius was shaking, slightly, in the way that people do when relief finally gets through the defenses that grief built, and Remus held on until it passed, right there in the ministry atrium with the floors crackling behind them and the maintenance staff tactfully looking elsewhere. When Sirius straightened up he was still gray and still too thin, but his eyes were clearer, and he looked at Remus with an expression that had James in it, the way certain mannerisms were so ingrained in both of them that you could see each other in each other. "You got him," Sirius said. "From the doorstep. From the doorstep. You fought the ministry. Ongoing." A pause. "You should see the files. You filed his will against Dumbledore." "To his face, technically." Sirius's eyes widened very slightly. Then, slowly, a grin came onto his face, not full force yet, not the serious black firecracker grin, but the beginning of it. "Tell me everything." "In the car," Remus said. "You need food, a bath, and approximately 10 hours of sleep, in that order." "Is there a cottage?" "Scotland." "Is there a lock?" "There is." Sirius exhaled. "Right. Okay. Let's go get my godson." Harry was at the window when they arrived, as he always was when Remus was expected, and he appeared at the front door before Remus had the car fully stopped. He stood on the front step and looked at Sirius, who had gotten out of the passenger side and stopped at the garden gate. They stared at each other. Harry with Lily's eyes and James's hair and the scar on his forehead and 5 years of stories about this person, and Sirius looking at the ghost of James Potter standing alive and small on a doorstep in Scotland and making no attempt whatsoever to contain what was on his face. "Your pad foot," Harry said. Sirius's voice, when it came, was rough. "And you're exactly like your father. Everyone says that. It's the best thing anyone can say." Harry came down the garden path, opened the gate, and looked at Sirius with the frank evaluating attention that he gave to everything. Then he held out his hand, very properly, the way Remus had taught him, meeting strangers with courtesy, because courtesy was a kind of armor. Sirius looked at the offered hand for a moment, and then, with something broken and careful in his expression, he shook it. Then Harry pulled him inside. "Moony says you need food first," Harry said, with the authority of someone passing on important instructions. "And a bath." "Good priorities," Sirius managed. "I made a list of questions," Harry said. "I've been saving them up. I have 11. From behind them, standing in the garden, Remus listened to Sirius Black's laugh echo through the cottage, real, fully real, a bit unsteady around the edges but present, alive, firecracker bright, and looked at the lock going golden in the late afternoon light, and felt something that had been wound tight in his chest since November 1st, 1981 release, slightly, like the first turn of a knot. Not undone yet. But moving. The nightmares were Sirius's to deal with, and he dealt with them in his way, which was by not sleeping much and by sitting in the kitchen in the small hours of the morning and teaching Harry card games by lamplight whenever Harry found him there, which Harry did with the regularity of someone who decided his job was to show up. Remus found them once at 2 in the morning, Harry wrapped in his blanket and Sirius teaching him exploding snap, and said nothing at all. He made tea and sat at the table and dealt himself in. "You can't play exploding snap at 2 a.m., Sirius said. "I live here," Remus said. "He's teaching me to count cards," Harry said, with immense satisfaction. "Absolutely not." Remus looked at Sirius. "He's 6. Gifted," Sirius said. "That's not the issue." Harry showed them both his hand. It was a winning hand. He knew it was a winning hand. He was waiting for the right moment to play it with the patience of a chess player who had learned from someone who was very good at chess, which was a category that applied to both Remus and, in a different key, Lily Potter. There it was, Remus thought. There was James's tactical brain filtered through Lily's patience. God help everyone. By 1989, when Harry was 7 going on 47, the cottage had become something different from what it had been the night they arrived. It had become theirs. 3 people, a lock, a library, an outbuilding that served one specific purpose 12 nights a year, and a garden that remained wild because none of them were particularly interested in taming it. Harry could read at a level that made his soon-to-be primary school teacher go very quiet when she assessed him. He could cast the first basic charms. Accidental magic had always been there, but at 7 he'd started to do it deliberately, the way children sometimes can, with that specific quality of wanting something to happen that preceded formal training. He had Remus's precision and Sirius's instinct and his own thing, which was a steadiness that neither of them had entirely had at that age, a quality of being centered in himself that Remus recognized as the consequence of being loved without conditions. He also knew his history. All of it, the war, the prophecy, Voldemort, Peter, the night at Godric's Hollow, the scar and what it might mean. Not as trauma but as information. Not as a wound he was supposed to hide but as context for who he was and where he came from. One evening in late summer, sitting on the garden wall with the last of the light on the water, Harry asked, when Voldemort comes back, because he said when, not if, because he had been told the truth from the beginning and he had ears. What happens? Remus looked at him. We deal with it. How? Together. With information and preparation and a great deal of magic and the specific advantage of actually knowing it's coming, which most people don't. Dumbledore says I'll have to face him. Dumbledore tells you things. He writes. I write back. You said I could. Remus had said he could, yes. He'd meant it. What do you think about what he says? Harry was quiet for a moment. I think he believes what he says. I think he thinks about it like a game. Like pieces on a board. He paused. I don't want to be a piece. You're not. But he thinks I might be useful as one. Remus looked at him for a long moment, this 7-year-old with his father's hair and his mother's eyes and something entirely his own in between, and said, if anyone ever tells you that you have to be a sacrifice, you tell me. Even Dumbledore? Especially Dumbledore. He met Harry's eyes steadily. Your parents chose to die protecting you. That was their choice. No one gets to make that choice on your behalf. Not him. Not me. Not anyone. You understand? Harry nodded. Then, with that quiet decisiveness that was one of his most particular qualities, okay. Okay, Remus said. The light finished its business with the lock and went down, and they sat on the wall in the warm dark, and from inside the cottage they could hear Sirius doing something in the kitchen that involved at least one pan hitting the floor, and Harry laughed, bright and full and entirely himself. Remus thought, James, I hope you can hear this. He thought, I think you can. Chapter 3, The Boy Who Was Ready. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry knew it was coming, had known, in the way you know something you've been told about your whole life, but he still picked it up from the garden path where the owl had dropped it with a kind of ceremony, turning it over in his hands, feeling the weight of the parchment. Mr. H. Potter, The Cottage, Loch Tula, Scotland. Not the cupboard under the stairs. Not a child-sized darkness with a number on the door. Just his name and his home. He brought it inside and set it on the breakfast table in front of Remus, who was reading the morning paper and drinking his tea with the focused tranquility of someone who had been expecting this and had decided to let it be Harry's moment. Well? Remus said, without looking up from the paper. It's real, Harry said, which was a strange thing to say about something he'd always believed in, but somehow holding it made it more real than believing in it had. It is, Remus agreed. Harry opened it. Read it. Set it down. Read it again. September 1st, he said. Yes. That's 6 weeks. Your counting is accurate. Harry looked at him. Remus folded the paper. They looked at each other across the breakfast table with the particular ease of people who have been having conversations for 10 years without needing to perform them for anyone, and then Harry said, Are you going to be all right? Remus blinked. Then something happened to his face that he didn't entirely manage to control. I live here, he said. The question is whether you're going to be all right. I'll be fine. A beat. But you've had me here for 10 years. I'm aware. Sirius will still be here. Sirius will cook everything wrong and lose his keys and argue with the owls, Remus said. But yes. He'll be here. He looked at the letter. And I'll be at Hogwarts. Harry's head came up. What? Remus picked up his tea. Minerva asked me last month if I'd consider taking the defense against the dark arts post. I said yes, conditional on your agreement. The expression on Harry's face went through several things. You're going to teach? I've been teaching you for 10 years. That's different. Is it? Harry sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone doing rapid internal calculations. Will that be, is that weird? Having you there? Probably. Remus set his cup down. But I'll have my own classroom and you'll have your own life, and we agreed 6 years ago that we were both people as well as a unit. This seems like a reasonable application of that principle. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't mind. I think I'd like it, actually. Knowing you're there. Then it's settled. Remus picked the paper back up. Eat your toast. We have to go to Diagon Alley this week. Can Sirius come? If he promises not to set anything on fire in Gringotts again. That was an accident. It was an accident caused by showing off. Harry's mouth curved. He was very impressive though. He was an absolute menace and you should not admire it. Too late, Harry said, and picked up his toast. Diagon Alley in August was exactly as advertised, overwhelmed and loud and shining with the particular quality of a place that believed wholeheartedly in its own magic. Harry had been before, several times, but September shopping had a different energy to it. Families everywhere, lists in hand, children pressing their faces to Madame Malkin's window, the smell of new parchment drifting out of flourish and blots. Harry walked through it with his hands in his pockets and his eyes moving the way Remus had taught him, not suspicious, just present, taking in information. He'd been in the magical world his whole life, had grown up moving between it and the Muggle world with the ease of someone who had a foot in both, and he didn't have the wide-eyed overwhelm of children who were encountering it for the first time. He had the settled comfort of someone coming home to a place that was already his. Madame Malkin measured him for robes while Sirius provided unrequested commentary on the fit from the doorway. Another boy was being fitted at the other end of the shop, blond, pale, with a bearing that suggested he'd been told from birth that rooms arranged themselves around him. He glanced at Harry with the instinctive evaluating look of someone who'd been raised to assess people immediately. Hogwarts too, he said. Yes, Harry said. I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy. Harry looked at him levelly. Not hostile. Just looking. Harry Potter. The name landed. He watched it land, watched the widening of the eyes, the recalibration, the moment where Malfoy's prepared social script encountered something it hadn't anticipated. It happened everywhere, the name recognition, and Harry had had 10 years to develop his relationship with it, which was to say he treated it as a fact about himself and nothing more, the way he treated his eye color or his height. The Harry Potter, Malfoy said. Just the one of me that I know of, Harry said. Malfoy looked at him, reassessing. Who are you with? Your family. My guardian. And my godfather. Harry nodded toward the door where Sirius was now arguing cheerfully with someone about the precise shade of the Hogwarts robes. That's Sirius Black. Another landing. Malfoy's expression shifted, recognition, complicated by something that looked like ingrained family opinion meeting current reality. Sirius Black had been exonerated 4 years ago, but he was still a Black who'd publicly rejected everything his family stood for, and in certain circles that carried a specific weight. My father knows him, Malfoy said, careful now. I imagine your father knows a lot of people, Harry said pleasantly, and turned back to Madame Malkin, who was pinning his left sleeve with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 30 years and had heard every first meeting exchange that existed. The fitting finished. Harry paid, from his own vault key, Gringotts card, which he'd had since he was 8 and managed with the responsibility of someone who had been taught about money as a real thing rather than an abstraction, and rejoined Remus outside. "Malfoy's son," Remus said, quiet, having seen through the window. "Draco," Harry said. "He's trying to figure out what I am." "And what are you?" "Undetermined," Harry said, and Remus smiled. "Flourish and blots was the best part. It always was." Harry moved through the shelves with the ease of someone who had lived in a library for 10 years, pulling books, reading covers, putting some back and keeping others. His list was finished in 20 minutes, but he spent another 40 browsing because he could, and Remus browsed alongside him, the two of them covering different sections and occasionally passing books across the aisle without comment. He found, in the back corner of the advanced theory section, a book called The Architecture of Defensive Spellwork that wasn't on any list. He read the first 3 pages standing in the aisle and looked up to find Remus watching him from around the corner of the bookshelf with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral. "It's not on the list," Remus said. "I know. It's a third-year text." "I know. A beat." "Put it with the others," Remus said. Harry put it with the others. He also got a book on the history of Animagus transformation because Sirius's transformation was still one of the most fascinating things he knew about, and a slim volume on potion theory that he'd been circling for a month since he'd found it referenced in something else. Remus did not comment on any of this. Sirius spent an extravagant amount in the shop next door and emerged with a bag that suggested he'd been making up for lost years in Azkaban through the medium of expensive quills. "I don't need 11 quills," Harry told him. "They're not all the same color," Sirius said. "That doesn't mean I need 11. You might need 11. When would I need 11 quills?" "I don't know," Sirius said. "That's the thing about preparedness. You don't know when." Remus said nothing. He had a quill in his own bag that he hadn't needed but had bought anyway. Harry noticed but was gracious enough not to mention it. The night before September 1st, the cottage had an atmosphere that was not quite quiet. Harry had packed and repacked his trunk twice and was now sitting on it in the middle of his bedroom, apparently having decided that sitting on it would prevent it from spontaneously reorganizing. Remus stood in the doorway with a cup of tea and looked at him. "You're nervous," Remus observed. "I'm ready," Harry said. "You can be both." Harry looked at the trunk. "What if the sorting, you'll be in Gryffindor?" "You don't know that. I know that the hat considers what you value, and you've valued bravery and loyalty for as long as I've known you. You could argue for Ravenclaw too, but," he paused. "Your parents were Gryffindors. Your instinct when things are difficult is to move toward them, not away. That's not a rule, but it's a tendency." Harry was quiet. "Then, what if people are weird about me?" "The main thing." "Some will be," Remus said. "You know how to handle it." "What if professors treat me differently?" "Some will. The good ones will course-correct when they see who you actually are." A pause. "Minerva won't. She'll probably be harder on you than anyone else, because she loved your parents and she'll hold you to the standard they set." "Is that good?" "I found it occasionally infuriating and deeply useful," Remus said. "So yes." Harry looked at him for a moment. "I've never been away from you before. Properly." "I know. For a whole year. 10 months. And I'll be there. In defense. In defense." Remus came fully into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "And you're not the same person you'd have been if I'd left you on that doorstep. You know that." Harry nodded slowly. "You're going in with 10 years of preparation, a vault at Gringotts, 2 people who dismantle the ministry before letting anything happen to you, and," he paused. "Genuine, actual knowledge of who you are. That is not nothing, Harry. That's everything." Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he got off the trunk and sat next to him on the bed. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to hear you say it." Remus put his arm around him the way he had 10 years ago on a cottage floor in Scotland when Harry was learning the concept of object permanence, and they sat there for a while with the night coming in through the bedroom window and the lock doing its silver dark thing far below. "Moony," Harry said. Thank you." Remus didn't say "you're welcome" because it seemed inadequate. He didn't say "of course" because it wasn't, because there had been nothing inevitable about any of it. It had been a series of choices made in difficult moments by people who chose correctly. He said, "Your dad would have been so proud of you." Harry breathed in once, steady. "I know," he said. King's Cross was chaos in the best possible way. They went through the barrier, Remus first, then Harry, then Sirius, who went through at a slight run for no reason at all other than that it remained, after years of doing it, undeniably fun. The Scarlet engine stood at the platform breathing white steam into the September air, and the noise and movement of it hit Harry like a wave. He pushed his trolley and looked around with his particular brand of attentiveness, cataloging faces, reading interactions. A family in the middle of the platform, red-haired, numerous, moving with the comfortable chaos of people who did this regularly. A girl near the back carriage, brown bushy hair, reading a textbook while her parents stood looking slightly dazed in the manner of muggles who just pushed through a brick wall. A group of boys comparing wand lengths near the front, which was a very 11-year-old thing to do. Remus shook his hand with the gravity of someone treating this with appropriate formality. Harry shook it back. Then Remus pulled him into a brief embrace. Neither of them performed these, they just did them when they were warranted, and this one was warranted, and said, quietly, "Right." Weakly, Harry agreed. Sirius picked him up in a hug that had nothing to do with formality and everything to do with Sirius being serious, and set him down, and said, "Don't let anyone tell you who you are," with the feeling of someone passing on a hard-won truth. "I know who I am," Harry said. "I know you do." Sirius's voice was rough. "That's what I mean." Harry boarded the train. He found an empty compartment toward the middle and stowed his trunk and sat down and looked out the window to where Sirius and Remus were standing on the platform. Sirius was already talking, filling the space the way he did. Remus was watching the train with the expression he had when he was not letting himself feel something in public. Harry raised one hand. Remus raised his. The train moved. 2 stops along the route, the compartment door opened and the red-haired family's youngest boy looked in. "Mind if I sit here? Everywhere else is full." Harry waved at the opposite seat. The boy dropped into it with the relieved energy of someone who'd been carrying a question for too long. He had freckles and a slightly worn set of robes and the ease of someone from a large family, comfortable with people, not precious about space. "Ron Weasley," he said. "Harry Potter." Ron's eyebrows went up. He looked at Harry's forehead with the instinct everyone had, which was understandable and which Harry had simply made peace with. "Sorry," Ron said immediately. Yeah. I knew there'd be loads of famous people at Hogwarts but I didn't think I'd," he stopped himself. "Sorry. That was weird." "It's fine," Harry said. "It happens. Does it bother you?" Harry considered the question properly, which was the only way he considered questions. "Not really. It used to, a bit. But I know who I am and why, so it's more just information about other people. How they were raised. What they think the name means." Ron looked at him for a moment, apparently recalibrating. "What do you think it means?" "It's my name," Harry said. "James and Lily Potter's son. That's what it means." Ron nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He pulled out a package of sandwiches with the ease of someone who'd learned to travel prepared. "Cheese or corned beef?" "Cheese, please." They ate sandwiches and Ron talked about his brothers with the freedom of someone who'd had a lifetime of practice describing them to strangers, which was to say vividly and with editorial asides that made Harry laugh twice before the first hour was out. There were 6 brothers. Harry had seen the red-headed contingent on the platform, 2 of whom were identical and apparently deeply committed to a life of tactical disruption. Fred and George, Ron said, with the tone of someone who had been managing this his whole life. They once put sticking charms on all the furniture. Mum was, yeah. That was a month of no pudding. He paused. What about you? No siblings, right? It's just your guardian. Remus, Harry said. And Sirius, my godfather. They're yeah, that's my family. Ron accepted this without the particular brand of pity that some people brought to it. Are they good? The best, Harry said simply. The door opened again. The girl from the platform, bushy hair, now without the textbook, leaned in with the air of someone who had been having a productive afternoon and was ready to extend it. Sorry, have you seen a toad? Someone's lost one, Neville, the boy from the compartment at the end, it's got away somewhere. No toad, Harry said. But we can help look. She blinked, apparently expecting to have to argue. Oh. Right. I'm Hermione. Hermione Granger. Harry. That's Ron. I know who you are, she said, then immediately said, sorry, I read a lot about the war, for background, before starting. I wanted to understand the context. She said it with the slight defensiveness of someone who'd had this backfire before. I'm Muggle-born, so I came in late and had to catch up. I read everything I could. That's sensible, Harry said. She looked at him as if she'd expected something else. Most people think it's excessive. Most people underprepare, Harry said. Come on, let's find this toad. The sorting was the first time Hogwarts went quiet in a way that felt specifically pointed. Harry had known it would happen. He'd prepared for it the same way he prepared for everything, by thinking through it in advance, deciding on his response, and committing to it. When Professor McGonagall read his name from the scroll and the great hall settled into that particular held-breath silence, he walked up to the stool and sat down and looked out at the hall full of faces looking back at him with the calm of someone who had been looked at his whole life and had decided it said more about the people doing the looking. The hat came down over his eyes. The voice in his head was dry and interested and ancient in a way that didn't feel threatening, just very old. Well. You're different from what they expected. Am I? Harry thought back. He'd known from Remus that the hat was a conversation, and he was good at conversations. Most children who carry this much potential are either terrified of it or drunk on it. You're neither. That's unusual. A pause. Your father sat in this seat 20 years ago and vibrated with it. Your mother was intensely curious about what I'd say. You're waiting. I know where I'm going, Harry thought. Do you? Gryffindor. That's where my parents were. Where I belong. Because they were there. Because I'm like them in the ways that matter. And different in the ways that don't. The hat was quiet for a moment that felt evaluative. There's a darkness you carry. You know about the prophecy. Yes. And it's information, Harry thought. Not a sentence. Not an identity. Information I'll use when it's relevant. Something in the hat seemed to settle. Well then, it said, with what sounded very much like satisfaction. That answers that. Gryffindor, it announced, and the red and gold table erupted, and Harry walked to it through the noise with the easy unhurried movement of someone who had known this was where they were going. He sat down between a third year who introduced herself as Angelina and a second year named Lee Jordan who immediately asked if he was the Harry Potter with the specific excitement of someone who considered this excellent social information. Harry said yes, accepted the handshake, and looked down the table at the teacher's high table where, at the end, Remus was seated between Flitwick and a woman Harry didn't recognize, and was looking at Harry with an expression of contained pride so intense that it was frankly visible from 30 feet away. Harry raised one eyebrow. Remus picked up his water glass in a small salute. Percy Weasley, 2 seats down, leaned over to say something about expectations and comportment that Harry acknowledged with enough courtesy to be polite and enough brevity to be clear, and Ron appeared at the end of the table, sorted Gryffindor, and dropped into the seat across with a, "I knew it," that carried enormous personal relief. Hermione was sorted Gryffindor too, with the hat barely pausing, and she sat down with the slightly surprised expression of someone who had prepared for every outcome and was processing which one had occurred. "Right then," Harry said. They looked at him. "Good start," he said. Hogwarts, as a physical fact, was extraordinary in a way that didn't diminish with familiarity. Harry had heard it described all his life, from Remus, who spoke about it with the particular combination of fondness and melancholy of someone who'd had his best years there, and from Sirius, who spoke about it with unqualified delight, but walking through it with his own feet was different. The staircases moved with a logic that revealed itself gradually. The portraits argued. The armor in the third-floor corridor occasionally shifted its weight. He navigated it well, which was a function of having a good spatial memory and having spent 10 years paying attention to environments. Ron's spatial memory was optimistic, which meant Ron frequently ended up somewhere interesting. Hermione had memorized the floor plan from Hogwarts, a history, and was right 90% of the time, which she found satisfying, and the remaining 10% catastrophically interesting. The three of them fell together the way certain people do, not through assignment or proximity but through a kind of recognition, an instinctive sense that the qualities the other people had were the ones worth being near. Ron was quick and loyal and had the specific courage of someone who'd grown up the youngest boy in a large family and had learned to hold his own. Hermione was brilliant and precise and, under the certainty she wore like armor, genuinely curious about everything. Harry liked them both for the specific reasons they were themselves, not for the general fact of their company. "You're already friends," Neville Longbottom observed, a week into term. He said it without accusation, more like someone noting geography. "Yes," Harry said. "What about you?" Neville looked mildly surprised to be asked. "I don't really, I keep breaking things." "What things?" "This week. A plant in herbology, a potions beaker, and Professor Flitwick's inkstand." "How'd you break the inkstand?" "I'm not entirely sure." Harry looked at him. Neville Longbottom had, as it happened, a specific kind of personal history that Harry knew about, parents in St. Mungo's, raised by his grandmother, a name that appeared in proximity to certain prophecy discussions that Remus had explained with care. He had his own weight to carry, and he carried it with a quiet persistence that was, Harry thought, actually quite brave, even if Neville didn't seem to know it yet. "Sit with us at breakfast," Harry said. Neville sat with them at breakfast. He knocked over the pumpkin juice on the first morning and apologized 4 times, and Ron said, "It's fine, here," and passed the napkins, and that was that. Remus's first defense class with the Gryffindor Slytherin first years had, predictably, a quality that no other class could replicate. Harry sat in the second row. Not the front was for people who wanted to be seen from the teacher's perspective, and Harry had long since decided that the best view of any room was slightly to the back and off-center. Hermione was in the front row. Ron was beside Harry, looking at the classroom with the specific alertness of someone who'd been told this professor was good. Remus walked in from the side door the way he always moved, unhurriedly, without announcement, with the quality of someone who knew exactly where they were going. He set his notes on the desk, looked at the room, and his eyes swept across it with the calm attention of someone who had been teaching one student for 10 years and was now scaling up. He looked directly at Harry once. Harry looked back. There was nothing in either of their expressions except the mutual acknowledgement of two people who knew each other in a room where most people didn't know that they knew each other, which was its own kind of language. Then Remus looked at the rest of the class. "I'm not going to ask you to open your textbooks today," he said. "If you already have them open, that's fine, but we won't need them." He leaned against the desk. "What I want is for each of you to tell me the last thing that frightened you." Silence. Not dark arts related. Not magic related. The last ordinary thing that frightened you. We're starting there, because understanding how fear works in your own body is the foundation of every defensive technique that exists. Hermione's hand went up. She said she'd been frightened of failing to find the correct platform at King's Cross. Someone else said spiders. Neville, after a moment, said large spaces. Good, Remus said, to each of them, without inflection that suggested good meant correct rather than useful. And did being frightened stop you doing the thing? Nods, mostly. Being frightened, Remus said, is information. It tells you something is at stake. The job isn't to not be frightened. The job is to move while frightened. That's what we'll practice in this class. Everything else, the spells, the counter curses, the theory, is scaffolding for that one skill. He picked up his wand. Now. One of you come up here. Nobody moved. Harry stood up. He heard Draco Malfoy, 2 rows back in the Slytherin section, make a quiet comment to the boy beside him, something with the word predictable in it. Harry ignored this in the particular way that Remus had taught him, which was to register it and then release it, because carrying people's opinions of you was weight you didn't need. He walked up to the front and turned and faced the class. What are you going to do? Remus asked him. What you tell me, Harry said. And if what I tell you is wrong? The class had gone very still. Then I'll say so, Harry said. Remus held his gaze for one moment. The teacher and student gaze, not the Moonian Harry gaze, the one that was entirely professional and also, between two people who knew each other this well, communicated a great deal anyway. Good, Remus said. Stand still. I'm going to cast a mild knockback jinx. Your job is not to block it. Your job is to notice, in the 2 seconds after I say the incantation, what your body does before I even cast. He said the incantation. Harry's body moved, 1 foot back, weight shifting, before the spell left the wand. Not a block. Not a dodge. Just an adjustment, instinctive and small, that reduced the impact when it came so that instead of knocking him over, he just stepped back. He stopped, reground his feet. What did you feel? Remus asked. Harry thought about it honestly. The sound first. The incantation's got a specific rhythm. Then, something in my legs. Your body reads threat before your conscious mind does. That's what we're training. Not just spells. That. He looked at the rest of the class. Your turn. Potions was a different animal. Severus Snape had been warned, presumably, by Dumbledore, and possibly also by the general awareness that Remus Lupin's ward was going to be sitting in his classroom. He handled this with the particular grace of someone who resented being handled. He looked at Harry at the start of the first lesson with eyes that moved carefully over him, James's face, Lily's eyes, and something passed through his expression that was too complicated to read quickly. Then he asked Harry what he'd get if he added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood. Draught of living death, Harry said. Asphodel mixed with wormwood. You'd need to control the temperature extremely carefully, too hot and the wormwood breaks down before the asphodel can bind with it. Snape looked at him. Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? A goat's stomach. It neutralizes most common poisons. A pause. You'd find me one in the potion supply cupboard, 3rd shelf, right side. I've been in there, Remus brought me in last week to check inventory. Another silence. What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? They're the same plant, Harry said. Also known as aconite. The name changes based on usage context. In a potion context, aconite's most significant application is, he paused, for one moment, and his expression didn't change. The wolfsbane potion, which treats lycanthropy. Reasonably important research history there. The class was very quiet. Snape looked at him with an expression that couldn't be read by the room and possibly not by Harry either, though Harry had a better angle on it than most. There was something there that wasn't hostility, or wasn't only hostility. Something more complicated. Something that had Lily Potter's name written somewhere in it. Adequate, Snape said, and moved on. It was not going to be easy. Harry had known it wouldn't be, Snape was a complicated figure in a story Harry had all the chapters of, a man who had been on 3 different sides of a war and survived all of them. Harry didn't like him especially. He also didn't dismiss him, because Remus had taught him that dismissing people who were complicated was the lazy version of understanding them, and the lazy version was dangerous. He paid attention in potions. He was accurate and methodical and didn't show off and didn't shrink, and by the end of October Snape had not been kind to him but had been fair to him in the narrow, precise way that Snape was fair to people who demonstrated competence without arrogance. It wasn't warmth. It was something. The stone was in the castle. Harry had known this, Remus had told him, when it became relevant, which was to say when Harry came home for Christmas the first year and said, "There's a dog guarding something on the 3rd floor corridor," and Remus had gone very still. "Tell me exactly what you saw," Remus said. Harry told him. Remus wrote 3 letters that evening, to Dumbledore, to McGonagall, and to Gringotts, all of which said, in various registers of concern, that the security around the Philosopher's Stone was not adequate for a school building full of 11-year-olds. Dumbledore replied that the protections were extensive and layered. "They are," Harry said. "I've walked past each of them. I worked out what they were. It took me 2 weeks." He paused. "Whoever's trying to get to it has already worked it out too." "Who is it?" Remus asked. "Quirrell," Harry said. "There's something wrong with him. He smells wrong." He frowned slightly. "I can't explain it better than that. I noticed it on the first day but I've been watching since and there's something underneath. Something that doesn't match the surface." Remus was quiet for a long moment. "Trust that instinct," he said. "I always do," Harry said. The letters got more pointed. Dumbledore's replies got shorter. By February, Harry had established, with Hermione's research assistance and Ron's logical mapping of the protection sequence, that the final protection was a logic puzzle, Snape's contribution, and that someone had been moving through the sequence progressively. "We should tell a professor," Hermione said. They were in the library, parchment spread, logic tree mapped in 3 colors. "We should tell Remus," Harry said. "He is a professor. He's also my guardian, which means he can do things a professor can't." He folded the parchment and put it in his bag. "McGonagall needs to know too." "What about Dumbledore?" Ron asked. Harry was quiet for a moment. "Dumbledore knows someone is trying to steal it and he left it here anyway," he said. "I have a theory about that." "Which is?" Hermione asked. "That he wants whoever it is to try. That the stone is bait." He met their eyes. "And I'm not interested in being part of the trap." He told Remus that evening by Floo. Remus's face went through something tight when Harry said Quirrell and Voldemort in the same sentence. "You're not going after it," Remus said immediately. "I know." A pause. "I mean it, Harry." "I know you mean it," Harry said. "I'm not going after it. I'm telling you so you can go after it." He met Remus's eyes through the Floo flame. "You and McGonagall and Dumbledore, if necessary. I've done my part. I found it." Remus looked at him for a long moment. The firelight moved across his face. "When did you grow up?" he said. "Gradually and then all at once," Harry said. "I read it in a book." "It wasn't funny." "It was a little funny." Remus shook his head, and there was something in the movement that was grief and relief and pride all at once. "I'll handle it tonight," he said. "Go to sleep. You'll tell me everything after." "I'll tell you everything after." "All right." Harry stood. "Remus. Quirrell's not, he's a host. He's not fully himself. Try to remember that when you—" "I know," Remus said, quietly. "I know. Go to sleep, Harry." Quirrell was found in the chamber beyond the protection sequence the following morning, alone, with the stone not on his person and Voldemort's remnant already fled. Dumbledore, who had apparently been a great deal more aware of the timeline than his replies to Remus's letters had suggested, was there before Remus and arrived after. The stone was destroyed. Quirrell was alive, barely. At breakfast the next morning Harry sat with Ron and Hermione and Neville and ate eggs and looked at the teacher's table where Remus was having an expression-free conversation with Dumbledore that read, from a distance, as entirely civil, and up close. Harry had learned to read Remus up close, as a man telling a much older man exactly what he thought about the choice to use a school as an operational arena. Dumbledore listened. He nodded, once. It wasn't victory. It wasn't agreement. But it was different from the doorstep at Privet Drive. Something had shifted in the decade between, some rebalancing of what Dumbledore knew about who Remus was and what he'd do and how far he'd go. Harry turned back to his eggs. Hermione was looking at him with the expression she had when she was working something out. "You knew he'd go," she said quietly. "Yes. You could have gone yourself. You'd worked out the whole sequence." "Yes. Why didn't you?" Harry thought about this, really thought, the way the question deserved. "Because I'm 11, he said. And I know what I can do, and I know what I'm for. And I'm not for getting myself killed over a stone when the person who should handle it is 30 feet away in a castle." "That's very measured," Hermione said. "My guardian's very measured," Harry said. "It rubs off." She looked at him for a moment more. Then she went back to her breakfast. Ron leaned over. "I think she's impressed." "She's always impressed," Harry said. "She just hasn't decided if she'll admit it yet." Hermione, without looking up, said, "I can hear you." "I know," Harry said. "Good morning." The train home at the end of June had a different quality than the train north had in September. Harry sat in the same compartment with Ron and Hermione and Neville, and the years sat between them like something they'd all carried together and could now set down for a moment. Ron fell asleep an hour in. Neville read. Hermione wrote something in a notebook. Harry looked out the window at Britain rolling past, green and varied and entirely itself, and thought about everything the year had been. He'd made friends that were real and not circumstantial. He'd navigated Hogwarts without getting lost, without losing himself, without letting the weight of his name replace the fact of his person. He'd found a problem and handled it the right way, which wasn't the most dramatic way but was the most effective way. He'd sat in Remus's defense class twice a week and been treated exactly like everyone else, which was the gift it was because it meant that who he was in that room had nothing to do with who anyone outside it thought he should be. Sirius was going to be at King's Cross. He'd sent 3 owls in the last month, each one more elaborate than the last in its expression of anticipation, the third one including a drawing of himself as Padfoot with a thought bubble that just said Harry. Harry had pinned it above his bed. He watched the window. Green becoming suburban becoming urban. The particular gathering quality of arriving. He thought about the prophecy, which he did sometimes, not with dread but with the focused attention of someone taking stock. Neither can live while the other survives. He'd known it for 5 years. It was a fact he lived alongside, the way Remus lived alongside his lycanthropy, not defined by it, not denying it, just present with it. Voldemort was a remnant. He'd be back. Harry would be ready. He turned away from the window. "Neville," he said. "Do you want to come to Scotland this summer? There's a lock." Neville looked up. His expression did something that was trying not to be too pleased and failing. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." "Good." Harry looked across at Hermione, who was still writing. "You too." Her pen stopped. "Both of you," Harry said. "There's room." Hermione closed her notebook and looked at him with the expression she had when something had met a standard she'd privately set. "All right," she said. Ron woke up, apparently from instinct. "Did someone say Scotland?" "Sleep," Harry told him. "After Scotland," Ron said, and closed his eyes again. Harry looked back at the window. London now, approaching, all brick and glass and the ordinary miracle of it. He was ready for what came next. He'd always been ready. The difference was that now he had 3 people he hadn't had in September. He thought it was probably the best trade he'd ever made. Chapter 4, The Prisoner They Never Should Have Kept. The letter from Millicent Burrows arrived on a Wednesday morning in August of 1993, and it said, in her characteristic style of maximum information in minimum words, Pettigrew. Alive. I have a witness. Come to London. Remus read it standing at the kitchen counter and then sat down, which was unlike him. Harry was outside with Ron, the two of them doing something involving a quaffle and increasingly ambitious throwing angles over the lock, and their voices carried through the open window with the particular quality of boys who had 3 weeks left of summer and intended to use all of it. Sirius was somewhere upstairs, probably reading, probably with his feet on the furniture. Remus sat for a moment. Then he went to the bottom of the stairs and said, Sirius. I need you down here. Something in his voice brought Sirius down in 30 seconds. He appeared at the top of the stairs and read Remus's face and came the rest of the way without being asked twice, which was not always the way Sirius operated but was when it mattered. Remus handed him the letter. Sirius read it. The change in him was something that happened underneath the surface first, a kind of going very still that Remus had only ever seen him do in moments of extreme significance. Then his jaw set, and his eyes came up, and they were the clearest Remus had seen them since before Azkaban. How? Sirius said. I don't know yet. She wants us in London. When? Today, I'd say. Remus looked at the window where Harry's voice came through bright and easy. Harry stays here. Harry will argue that. Harry will lose. Sirius looked at him with something that was almost a smile. Since when do you win arguments with Harry? Since always. He makes good arguments and I listen to them and then I say no and he accepts it with extraordinary grace because I raised him well. You raised him to argue back. I raised him to argue well, Remus said. There's a distinction. He moved toward the back door. Give me a minute. He found Harry in the moment between throws, standing at the edge of the lock with the quaffle under one arm, looking at the water. Ron was on the other side, waiting with the effortless patience of someone used to the pauses in Harry's attention. Harry had always had this quality, this habit of stopping, briefly, to look at something properly, as if the world was always worth a second of genuine attention. Something's happened, Harry said, before Remus opened his mouth. You can't have heard me coming. I was completely quiet. You always come out of the left door when it's something important. The right door is normal things. He turned around. What is it? Remus told him. Concise, complete. Pettigrew. Alive. London. Burrows had a witness. Harry didn't look surprised exactly, more like a piece he'd been holding for a long time had just found its place. He nodded once, slow and certain. That's it, then. That's what you needed. Possibly. We don't know yet what she has. But if Pettigrew's alive, then everything changes for Sirius. Yes. Remus looked at him steadily. You stay here. Emmeline can come if you need. We don't need Emmeline, Harry said, with the mild offense of a 13-year-old. Ron and I will be fine for a day. I know you'll be fine. I'm checking anyway. He paused. You understand why I'm going without you. Harry looked at him for a moment with those eyes that never missed anything. You're going to need to move fast and not worry about me, he said. And Sirius needs it to be just you. It was so precisely correct that Remus felt it in his chest. Yes, he said. Then go. Harry turned back to the lock. Tell Sirius I said, tell him it's going to be okay. Remus was quiet for one beat. I'll tell him. He went back inside. He heard Harry say to Ron, perfectly normally, they have to go to London, and Ron say, oh yeah. Everything all right, and Harry say, it will be, with the settled certainty of someone who had decided this was true and intended to hold it true through sheer conviction. Millicent Burroughs's office in Diagon Alley was the sort of place that had been accumulating legal history for so long that the history had become structural, parchment and precedent stacked on every surface, files color-coded by a system only she fully understood. The smell of old books and the faint sharp note of several active revealing charms she kept running continuously because she had once lost a case due to a document she hadn't noticed and had not repeated that experience. She was standing when they arrived, which meant she'd been too energized to sit. "Close the door," she said. Remus closed it. "Peter Pettigrew," she said, "was seen alive in Amsterdam 3 weeks ago by Marcus Flint Sr., who is a reliable if morally flexible individual who knew Pettigrew personally before the war." She moved to the main table, where a file was open. Flint saw him in a market. Pettigrew saw Flint, panicked, transformed, and ran. Sirius had gone very still again. Transformed into what? Burroughs looked at him. A rat. The word sat in the room. Remus had known, intellectually, for years, had built his theory of Sirius's innocence on it, had argued it in 7 years of Weisengamot submissions, but hearing it confirmed in a ground-floor office in Diagon Alley on a Wednesday morning made it suddenly, brutally real. Peter Pettigrew was alive. Peter Pettigrew had been alive for 12 years. Peter Pettigrew had been a rat for 12 years and that meant, he didn't finish the thought. Flint gave a sworn statement, he asked. "Notarist yesterday. He's not without self-interest, he wants something from the ministry in exchange, but the statement itself is independently verifiable because Pettigrew was registered as an animagus with the ministry before the war." She turned a page. Rat. Male. Specific markings, which Flint described before we showed him the registration. Match is exact. Sirius made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "There's more," Burroughs said. "I've been going back through the original arrest file, which is thin as I've said before, but there are field notes that weren't included in the formal paperwork. An aura named Proudfoot noted at the scene that the blast pattern was inconsistent with Pettigrew being killed by Black." She set the page down. "He filed it. It was not followed up. Who was running the operation?" Remus said. "Bartemius Crouch Sr." She said it without inflection. She didn't need to add anything. Sirius sat down in the client chair. It was the first time Remus had seen him sit down suddenly since the ministry atrium, which was the only other time Sirius had encountered something that outran his ability to stay standing. He put his elbows on his knees and his hands in his hair and the back of his neck was visible, and Remus had a sudden and complete memory of the 3 of them in the library at school, Sirius, James, himself, hunched over something at 2 in the morning, and felt the dimension of everything they'd lost with a sharpness that 12 years hadn't dulled. "I want him found," Sirius said. His voice was extremely level. "He'll run," Burroughs said. "He's been running for 12 years. "I know how Peter runs," Sirius said. "He always ran toward something. He didn't just flee, he had a destination." "Where was he in Amsterdam? What was he near?" Burroughs looked at her file. Flint was near the waterfront. International Port Key Station. He was leaving. Or arriving. Sirius looked up. He had the same quality in his eyes now that Harry sometimes had, that forward-looking clarity, information being processed at speed. "He's come back. He's been watching. He followed us when we moved from Amsterdam and he wanted to know where, he wants to find," he stopped. "Voldemort," Remus said. "Yes." Sirius stood up. "We need to find him first." "That," Burroughs said, "is not within my professional remit." "No," Remus agreed. "That's ours." They found Peter Pettigrew 11 days later, which was fast enough that it suggested some part of him had wanted to be found, or at least had been careless in the way that people who've been running for years sometimes get careless when they think the chase is over. He was in a Muggle boarding house in Manchester, in a room at the end of the 3rd floor. He'd been living as a rat in the walls and coming out at night. The landlady thought the room had a resident mouse problem and had tried 3 different humane traps. None of them had caught anything. Remus had contacted Alastair Moody, who was officially retired but considered retirement a theoretical concept. Moody had contacts that Burrows didn't, and a methodology for locating people who didn't want to be found that was more direct than legal channels and more reliable than luck. They went in at 6 in the morning, which was Moody's preference. He had strong feelings about early morning apprehensions that he'd expressed to Remus at length on the drive over. The room was empty when they entered, except for a scratching sound behind the skirting board. "Peter," Remus said, to the room at large. "We've sealed the building. Sirius is outside. We know what you are and we know you're in here." Silence. "I want you to know," Remus continued, in the calm measured way he'd been speaking to complicated situations his whole life, "that we're not here to hurt you. We're here because Sirius Black spent 4 years in Azkaban for something you did, and there are things you're going to have to answer for, and the manner in which you answer them is still somewhat within your control. That changes the moment you run." More silence. Then a small grey rat came out from under the skirting board, and sat in the middle of the floor, and looked at Remus with black bead eyes, and transformed. Remus had thought about this moment. He had played it in his head various ways over the years, what Peter would look like, what he'd say, whether he'd be the person Remus remembered or whether Azkaban and guilt and running had changed him into something unrecognizable. He tried to prepare himself for any version. He hadn't quite prepared for how small Peter looked. Not physically, though he was shorter than memory suggested, just small in the way that certain people are small when confronted with the thing they've done. As if all the space they used to occupy has caved in around the decision. He was older. They all were. He was soft around the middle and pale with the pallor of someone who'd spent 12 years either underground or abroad, and his eyes moved immediately to the corners of the room with the instinct of someone who'd been checking exits for longer than he could remember. "Remus," he said. "Hello, Peter," Remus said. Pettigrew's eyes went to Moody, who was standing by the door like a geological feature. Then back to Remus. "It wasn't," he started. "Don't," Remus said. "Not harshly. Just precisely. Don't do that. Not with me." Peter's mouth closed. "You're going to come with us," Remus said. "You're going to give a full statement to the Wisingamot. You're going to tell them everything, the switch from James to you as secret keeper, what happened on the street, all of it. And in exchange," he paused. "In exchange, Burrows will argue for the lightest possible sentence, and I will not put you in the same room as Sirius without warning, which is more consideration than you deserve." Pettigrew looked at him with the expression of someone who had been running for so long that stopping felt like falling. "He'll kill me," he said. "Sirius is outside," Remus said. "He hasn't come in. Think about what that tells you." It told him that Sirius, with all the fury of 12 years in Azkaban and James's death between them, was standing outside a building that contained the man responsible for all of it and had not broken down the door. Because Remus had asked him to wait. Because Sirius trusted Remus's judgment even when it cost him. Some of that calculation moved through Pettigrew's face. He said, very quietly, "I was afraid. You have to understand that I was afraid of him. I didn't know what else to do." "I know you were afraid," Remus said. "That doesn't change what you did. It just explains it." He held out his hand. "Come on." Peter looked at the hand for a moment. Then he took it. The Wisingamot hearing was 3 weeks later and lasted 4 hours and was, in terms of institutional theatre, one of the more significant events in Wizarding Britain's recent history. Burrows gave the opening argument. Pettigrew gave his statement, full, complete, corroborated by the Flint testimony and the blast analysis and the animagus registration, and when it was done the chamber had a quality of having witnessed something. The verdict on Peter Pettigrew was 5 years in Azkaban, which Burrows considered a satisfactory result for cooperation combined with genuine culpability. The verdict on Sirius Black, the official review and formal exoneration to replace the administrative exoneration from 7 years prior, was delivered by the chief warlock in language that included the word regrettable regarding the original arrest procedure approximately 4 times. Moody, who had attended as a witness, leaned over to Remus and said, 14 years late and they'll call it regrettable and expect everyone to go home happy. I know, Remus said. And will they? Remus looked at Sirius, who was sitting at the defendant's table, not as a defendant, just because that was where he'd been placed, listening to the verdict being read with an expression that was absolutely unreadable. Controlled in a way that Sirius was rarely controlled, holding everything in until the official moment. Ask me in an hour, Remus said. The hour was actually 20 minutes and it happened in a small courtyard behind the Wisengamot building, where the 4 of them, Remus, Sirius, Burrows, and Moody, stood in the September afternoon after everyone else had gone through the main exit. Burrows shook Sirius's hand with the directness of a woman who had been fighting this battle for 7 years and was deeply satisfied that it was over. The compensation petition will be filed this week, she told him. Azkaban imprisonment without trial carries a statutory compensation provision, you'll hear from me about the amount. I don't, Sirius started. You'll hear from me, Burrows repeated, in the tone that meant this was not a subject for discussion, and left. Moody looked at Sirius. Moody had a quality in his good eye, the real one, before he lost it, that was entirely different from the false eye's aggressive surveillance. The real eye sometimes just looked at people. You did well, he said. Waiting. Remus asked me to, Sirius said. I know. Means you did well listening. He left too, because Moody had places to be and didn't linger over emotional moments, which was possibly the only coping mechanism he'd ever developed and it had served him adequately. Remus and Sirius were alone in the courtyard. Sirius sat on the low stone wall. He'd been held together all morning by the formality of the hearing, by the structure of the thing, and now that the structure was removed he looked like someone who had run very far and had only just noticed. It's done, Remus said. It's done, Sirius said. How do you feel? Sirius looked at the sky. I don't know yet, he said honestly. I thought I'd feel, he stopped. I've been pointing at this for 12 years. The trial. The exoneration. The formal one, the real one, the public, and now it's happened and I thought it would feel like something arriving but it just feels like James is still dead, Remus said quietly. The word landed between them the way it always did, not cruelly but truly, the way certain truths land when you stop managing them. Yes, Sirius said. That doesn't go away, Remus said. I haven't found anything that makes it go away. He sat beside him on the wall. I've found things that make it coexist with living, but it doesn't go away. Sirius was quiet for a long time. The compensation money, he said eventually, I want to put it in trust. For Harry. His Gringotts vault already has James's estate but I want, Sirius. I want him to have something from me specifically. Not James's money with me as custodian. Mine. Remus looked at him. Then do that. I also want, he exhaled. I want to be more present. I've been at the cottage but I've been haunting it a bit. I think you know that. I know. I need to stop haunting and start, he gestured vaguely. Living, Remus said. Living. Sirius looked at the courtyard wall. Harry's going to be at Hogwarts again next week. Yes. And I'll be alone at the cottage. You could not be. Sirius frowned. What? You could get a flat, Remus said. In Hogsmeade, perhaps. Or somewhere else that isn't both of us rattling around that cottage like a memory. He paused. It would be good for you. The independence. Sirius turned to look at him. You've been thinking about this. I think about most things. Are you trying to evict me? I'm suggesting that you are 40 years old and you deserve a life that is fully yours. Yes. Remus met his eyes steadily. The cottage will always be there. Harry will always be there. But you spending all your time in someone else's house isn't healing. It's postponing. Sirius opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked at Remus the way he sometimes did, the look that had Harry's quality in it, the one that Remus had decided was just a marauder thing, this ability to register things that were hard because they were true. Hogsmeade is close, he said finally. 15 minutes from Hogwarts, Remus said. I could visit. More than now, actually, I'd have a reason to be in the area. Exactly. And you're at Hogwarts again this year. Third time teaching defense. You're better at it every year, Sirius said. James would've, he'd have absolutely loved that you're teaching. He'd have been insufferable about it. He'd have said things like Remus's students are getting the best defense education in Britain to every person he met. He'd have been right, Remus said, and Sirius laughed, and it was the Real laugh, the one that had been returning by increments since the first exoneration and was, in this courtyard today, finally fully present. Harry was at King's Cross on September 1st with Ron and Hermione and Neville, and he and Remus had their usual moment, the handshake and the brief embrace and the look that communicated everything, and Harry said, I heard it went well, with the ease of someone who'd been following the legal developments for 3 weeks via Daily Owl. You were worried, Remus said. I was optimistic, Harry corrected. There's a difference. Not when you check your owl at 6 in the morning there isn't. Harry's mouth curved. Has Sirius found a flat? He's looking. He found something on the high street that he described as perfectly sized, which I think means it's enormous. Let him have enormous. Harry looked down the platform. He's never had his own place. He went from Grimmauld Place to school to James's to Azkaban to our cottage. He paused. Let him have enormous. Remus looked at him, 13 years old, dark hair wild because he never tried to manage it, James's face with Lily's eyes with 10 years of something specifically his own written in between. When did you become the wisest person in this family? Remus said. Gradually and then all at once, Harry said, which was the second time he'd used this phrase and Remus was starting to think it was a private joke at his expense. The first day back at Hogwarts had its particular rhythm, the Great Hall catching up, the first years blinking at the ceiling, the upper years re-establishing the social geography that summer had shuffled. Harry was at the Gryffindor table between Ron and Hermione, listening to a conversation about Quidditch prospects with one ear and conducting his own survey of the hall with the automatic attentiveness he applied to any room. The new divination professor was a dramatic woman named Trelawney who had swept in smelling of incense and immediately made Ron look slightly alarmed about his life expectancy. Hagrid had the care of magical creatures post, which Harry thought was excellent. Hagrid's care for magical creatures came from genuine love rather than academic distance, and love was usually the better teacher. And Remus, at the teacher's table, who raised his water glass infinitesimally. Harry raised his pumpkin juice. Hermione saw this exchange and looked between them with the expression she had when she was deciding whether to ask about something, and decided she'd wait and observe instead, which was her better instinct. New defense teachers familiar, Ron said, without looking up from his food, because Ron's observational skills were concentrated specifically in domains he cared about. Yes, Harry said. Is he, oh. Ron looked up. Is that Professor Lupin? As in your 3rd year in a row, Harry said. He rotates the curriculum so it doesn't repeat. Right. Ron considered this. Is it weird? No, Harry said. He treats me like everyone else in class, which means he's harder on me because he knows what I can do. Harder how? He doesn't let me coast. Harry ate. Which is good, actually. I'd coast otherwise. Hermione looked up at that. You wouldn't coast. You're not capable of coasting. I'm absolutely capable of coasting, Harry said. I just have good reasons not to. That's not the same as coasting. Fine. I'm capable of not reaching as far as I should. Remus doesn't let me stop at competent. Hermione looked thoughtful. Then, that's what a good teacher does. Yes, Harry said. It is. The first defense class of third year started with Remus standing in front of a wardrobe. The wardrobe was moving. It was also making sounds that suggested whatever was inside it had opinions about wardrobes as a concept. Boggart, said Hermione immediately. 10 points to Gryffindor, Remus said. Now. A boggart assumes the form of whatever frightens you most. This is useful to know, and it's useful to examine, because, he looked at the class. What? Because fear is information, said Neville, from the back, with the confidence of someone who had been told this and had held it for 3 years. Exactly. Remus looked at Neville. You first, I think. Harry watched Neville walk to the front of the class knowing that Neville's greatest fear was Snape, which Neville had admitted once late at night in the common room in the way people admit things when they've stopped thinking about the audience. He watched Neville stand in front of that wardrobe and pull himself together the way Neville always pulled himself together, not dramatically, just quietly, just deciding that he was going to do the thing, and when the boggart burst out as Snape and Neville pointed his wand and said ridiculous and put Snape in his grandmother's clothes and the class laughed, Harry laughed too. He laughed because Neville had been terrified and had done it anyway, and because the laughter was real. When it was Harry's turn he stood in front of the wardrobe with his wand ready and the boggart came out and it was not Voldemort, which some people might have expected, and it was not Remus transformed, which was the other possibility that had occurred to him. It was a grave. 2 graves, side by side, with James and Lily's names on them, and the date, and the stillness of it, that particular stillness of something that had already happened. He heard Hermione's intake of breath beside him. He stood and looked at it. Then he raised his wand and said ridiculous clearly and evenly, and the graves transformed, into a photograph. The moving one from the cottage hallway, the one with all 4 of them young and laughing, James with his arm round Sirius, Remus looking exasperated in the corner. The boggart had shown him the thing he feared. He'd shown it the thing he had. The image dissolved and the boggart fled back into the wardrobe, apparently defeated by this particular counter-image more thoroughly than by anything else it had encountered, and Remus's eyes were on him with the specific quality of contained emotion that Harry had learned to read across any room. Good, Remus said, and his voice was perfectly steady. It's a good picture, Harry said. October brought the Hogsmeade visits and Harry's first meeting with Sirius's new flat, which was indeed enormous and which Sirius had furnished with the enthusiasm of a man decorating his first proper home at 40 years old. Harry walked through it and made genuine complimentary noises about the study and the kitchen and the excessive number of bookshelves Sirius had installed. How many books do you actually own? Harry asked. Currently. Fewer than the shelves require. Sirius looked at the shelves. I'm working on it. You have enough room for a person here, Harry said, looking at the second bedroom. If someone needed it. Sirius frowned slightly. Are you angling for a base? Not for me. I have Hogwarts. Harry moved back to the sitting room. Just an observation. He sat on the sofa, which was very good. Sirius had excellent taste in furniture, he'd always had it, it was one of the most consistent things about him. I need to talk to you about something. That sounds serious. It is. Harry met his eyes. Pettigrew mentioned someone in his statement. In the parts that Remus summarized for me, he mentioned that he'd been reporting to someone. In the years he was running. Not just surviving, but actually, serving. Sirius went very still. I read the statement. Voldemort's not gone, Harry said. You know that. Remus knows that. Pettigrew knew it and went looking, which means he knows where Voldemort is, Sirius said. Or was. Which means Voldemort has resources, Harry said. Information. A spy who's been running for 12 years and gathering, he stopped. Sirius. He was a rat in the Weasley house. For years. Sirius stood up. He was Ron's pet, Harry said. Scabbers. Ron had him since before Hogwarts. Since before I arrived at Hogwarts, meaning Pettigrew was watching the Weasley family, the family closest to me, for, Remus, Sirius said immediately. We have to tell Remus. He knows. I told him this morning. Harry looked at him steadily. We don't know what Pettigrew passed on. We don't know where Voldemort is. What we know is that the timeline is moving, and I want us to be ahead of it rather than behind it. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Harry sat on the sofa with his hands on his knees, 13 years old, and had the quality that Sirius had seen in him since he was 5 in a garden, asking a question that was better than it had any right to be. The quality of being present to the full dimension of a situation without being paralyzed by it. You're very like your parents, Sirius said. I know. Harry said it warmly, not like a deflection. That's not a bad thing. No, Sirius agreed. It's absolutely not. He sat back down. Tell me what you want to do. I don't want to do anything yet, Harry said. I want the three of us, you, me, Remus, to decide together. Because this isn't just my situation. It affects all of us and we make decisions together. He paused. That's the rule. Since when is that a rule? Since always, Harry said. Remus just never formalized it. I'm formalizing it. Sirius looked at him. Something happened in his face, something that moved through several things, landed somewhere warm and a bit undone. James would have said something like that. James had in fact said something like that, in their 5th year, facing a situation that had been above their weight, and Sirius had laughed at him and then done exactly what he proposed. All right, Sirius said. Then we meet. The three of us. When? This weekend. I'll have Remus come. Saturday? Saturday. Sirius nodded. Then, carefully, Harry. Are you scared? Harry considered it honestly. A bit, he said. Not of Voldemort specifically. He paused. Of making a mistake that cost someone. That's what I'm afraid of. Don't make the mistake then. I'm working on that, Harry said, and his mouth curved slightly. Hence the meeting. Saturday was grey and windswept and the loch was full of chop. The three of them sat around the kitchen table with tea and Remus's notes and the pages Burrows had shared from Pettigrew's full statement, and the maps of known Death Eater movements in the years since the war. Remus had been adding to the maps. He'd never stopped, exactly, he maintained them the way someone maintains an old habit they've decided to keep because the cost of discontinuing it is too high. They covered the kitchen table now and Harry spread them flat and looked at them with the focused attention of someone reading a landscape. Albania, Harry said, pointing. That's where the intelligence has been pointing for 3 years, Remus confirmed. Pettigrew was heading toward an international port key station when Flint saw him in Amsterdam. Albania direction. Sirius nodded. He found him. Or found where he was. Which means Voldemort knows Pettigrew was caught, Harry said. He knows Sirius was exonerated. He knows the timeline of everything, basically, because his informant was in the Weasley house with access to the Hogwarts connection for 2 years. Ron did not know about this yet. Harry had been thinking about how to tell him for 2 weeks and had not yet arrived at a phrasing that felt right. It was the most personally difficult part of the whole situation, not the strategic implications, those were manageable, but the look on Ron's face when he found out that his rat for 6 years had been a person, and that person had been watching his family. We don't move against Voldemort directly, Remus said. It wasn't a question. No, Harry said. That's for later. And for more people than us. He looked at the map. What we do now is prepare. I want to be better than I am. Specifically in 3 things. He held up fingers. Advanced transfiguration, because if Pettigrew could be a rat for 12 years then Animagus theory is relevant and I want to understand it fully. Dueling, which is different from defense. And whatever Voldemort's actual form is, because a remnant isn't a person and the techniques that work against a person don't necessarily work against a remnant, Remus said quietly. Yes. Harry looked at him. So we need to know what he actually is. What form he's taken since Godric's Hollow. And for that we need information. I can ask Dumbledore, Remus said. Ask him directly, Harry said. Not as a colleague. As Harry's guardian. Be specific. He paused. He knows more than he said. He's been watching this thing for years. Whatever he knows, we should know. Remus and Sirius exchanged a look. What? Harry said. Nothing, Sirius said. He gestured at the maps, at the room, at Harry specifically. You're doing a war room. At 13. I'm doing preparation, Harry said. Which is different from a war room. A war room implies an active conflict. This is intelligence gathering. He paused. Remus taught me the distinction. I did, Remus confirmed. So. Harry looked at both of them. Are we agreed? We're agreed, Sirius said. Remus? Remus looked at him across the kitchen table, at the maps and the notes and the son of James and Lily Potter who had been raised not to be afraid and who had become something specifically and wholly himself, not a weapon, not a symbol, not a prophesied sacrifice. Just a person who knew what was at stake and had decided to be ready for it. We're agreed, he said. Harry nodded once. Good. He reached for the teapot. Who wants more tea? Sirius laughed, firecracker bright. Outside the window the lock was choppy and the wind was high and the hills were the deep green of early autumn, and in a kitchen in Scotland 3 people who had come together through grief and stubbornness and love sat around a table with maps and tea, and planned for the thing that was coming with all the particular determination of people who had already decided, collectively and individually, how it was going to end. Not badly. Not at the cost of any of them. Not on someone else's terms. Chapter 5, The Name in the Goblet. The Triwizard Tournament announcement came at the start of term feast, and Harry listened to Dumbledore describe it with the particular quality of attention he reserved for things that were being presented as one thing while being another thing entirely. The rules were specific. An age line. 1 champion per school. Glory and 1,000 galleons. Dumbledore's eyes moved across the great hall with the look he had when he was watching for reactions, cataloging responses, reading the room the way a man reads a room when he has reasons. Harry ate his food and thought about timing. The Goblet of Fire arrived the next morning in the entrance hall, enormous and ancient and blue-flamed and generating the kind of atmosphere that attached itself to objects that had been important for a very long time. Students clustered around the age line Dumbledore had drawn, some trying to cross it with a variety of approaches that ranged from creative to simply ambitious. Harry walked past it twice. Both times he felt something, not magnetic, not quite attraction, more like the feeling of being noticed by an object, which was not a sensation he particularly enjoyed and which he filed away without showing it on his face. He wrote to Remus that evening. The goblet is doing something I don't like. Hard to describe. Feels aware. Thoughts? The reply came the next morning before breakfast, which meant Remus had stayed up or woken early to respond, which told Harry the thought had concerned him. An aware goblet suggests additional enchantment beyond the tournament binding. Could be benign, the magic selecting based on criteria. Could be interfered with. Watch who puts their name in. Watch who is near it when you're not watching. Don't put your name in. I was already not putting my name in, Harry wrote back. Good. I'm 14, not impulsive. Your father was 14 once. Harry conceded this point by not replying. The Beauxbatons contingent arrived in a carriage pulled by Abraxan horses that were large enough to make the Hogwarts grounds look briefly modest, and Harry watched from the steps with the rest of the school with genuine interest, not at the spectacle, which was considerable, but at the people. The way they moved. The way they assessed the school, the students, the competition. A girl near the front of the group had the quality of someone who was used to being looked at and had long since transcended caring about it. She walked through the attention the way people walk through weather. The Durmstrang ship rose from the lake in a way that was clearly designed for maximum visual effect and succeeded. Victor Crumb came off the gangplank last, which was also clearly designed, and the reaction from the student body confirmed that Crumb had achieved the particular kind of fame that preceded him everywhere and that he wore with the exhausted patience of someone who had gotten exactly what he wanted and discovered it was more complicated than advertised. Harry caught Crumb's eye briefly in the movement of the crowd. Crumb looked at him with the same evaluating quality, two people measuring each other in the way of people who were accustomed to being measured, and then moved past. Ron, at Harry's shoulder, said, "That's Victor Crumb." "I know. That's Victor Crumb, Harry. I remain aware. I'm just saying." Ron turned to look after the Durmstrang students. "Do you think he'd sign my Chudley Cannons?" "Crumb doesn't play for Chudley Cannons," Hermione said, on Harry's other side, with the patience of someone who had explained this before. "I know that. I just thought as a professional Quidditch player he might, Harry said. "He seems approachable. Tired of the celebrity, but approachable." Ron and Hermione both looked at him. "What?" Harry said. "How can you tell he's tired of the celebrity?" Hermione asked. "He came off the gangplank last, which is a choice made for effect, but his face while he was doing it had the look of someone who's been doing an effect for so long that the effect has become the job rather than the supplement to it." Harry paused. "Plus he looked at me the way I look at people who look at me. You recognize it after a while." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "That's either very perceptive or very sad." "Both," Harry said. "Mostly the first." The champions were selected on Halloween. Harry was sitting between Ron and Hermione at the Gryffindor table with his arms crossed and his expression set to neutral when the goblet erupted for the third time, and the third slip of parchment came out, and Dumbledore read the name with an intonation that was absolutely controlled and absolutely significant. Harry Potter. The hall went from noise to silence in under a second. Harry sat completely still. He felt the hall looking at him. He felt Ron's head turn beside him, and Hermione's quick intake of breath, and the specific quality of 300 people recalibrating what they thought they'd known about the evening. He felt the Slytherin table's reaction, which was layered and complicated, Malfoy's face doing three things at once in the torchlight. He felt, very clearly, the particular quality of having been used. Not by the goblet, by whoever had put his name in it. He stood up. Slowly, without urgency, the way you stand when you intend to make it clear that you're choosing to stand and not being compelled to. He looked at Dumbledore at the head of the hall, and Dumbledore looked back with those blue eyes that were impossible to entirely read, and Harry walked up through the silence with the unhurried ease of someone going where they'd decided to go. At the teacher's table he stopped. "I didn't put my name in," he said. Directly, audibly, not a whisper, because the room needed to hear it and he wasn't interested in managing anyone's uncertainty about his position. "I want that on the record immediately. I did not submit my name to the goblet." "The goblet has selected," Bartemius Crouch started. "The goblet was tampered with," Harry said. "Whatever was done to it submitted my name as a binding magical contract without my consent, which I would like someone to explain to me in legal terms, please, because I'm interested in understanding the argument by which I'm obligated to participate in something I didn't enter." The room had somehow gone even quieter. Harry was aware of this without looking back. Crouch's expression was the expression of a man encountering a complication he hadn't planned for. Dumbledore said, carefully, "Harry. The magic of the goblet is binding. It creates a contract requires consent from both parties," Harry said. "I didn't consent. The question is whether the magical obligation is on me, which would require my knowing and willing submission, or on whoever submitted my name, which is where I'd suggest the obligation actually lies." He looked at Dumbledore specifically. Not accusingly. Just directly. "I want Remus here," Harry said. "Tonight." before any further decision is made about my participation or non-participation. He's my magical guardian and he should be part of this conversation. He paused. You know he'll agree with me. Dumbledore looked at him for one long, measuring moment. Then he turned and sent a Patronus. Remus arrived in 40 minutes, which meant he'd been ready. Either he'd already been on his way or he'd received some earlier communication that had put him on alert. He came through the side door of the anteroom where Harry was waiting with Dumbledore and Crouch and a collection of professors and the other 3 champions, who were looking at Harry with various combinations of confusion and interest. He assessed the room in 2 seconds and came to stand beside Harry without commentary. Tell me, he said. Harry told him everything. Concise, complete, including his arguments about contractual consent. Remus listened without interrupting, which was the way Remus listened to things that mattered. When it was done, Remus turned to Dumbledore. He's right about the contract law. The binding magic of the tournament creates an obligation on a willing participant, Remus said. Harry's name was entered without his knowledge or consent. The obligation of that act lies with whoever performed it. He looked at Crouch. This is in the tournament charter, Article 7, subsection C, which I know because I read the charter last month when the tournament was announced because it seemed prudent. He met Crouch's eyes. Harry can withdraw. The consequences of withdrawal, specify what they are, Remus said. In precise terms. Crouch was quiet. Because if the consequences of withdrawal are designed as a deterrent for a willing participant who has changed their mind, they don't apply to an unwilling participant who never had a choice. He held Crouch's gaze with the absolute equanimity of a man who had been having this kind of argument with the Ministry for 12 years and had won the majority of them. So specify the consequences, and we'll determine whether they apply. The silence stretched. Dumbledore said, very quietly, the consequences as written apply to willing withdrawal. A pause. The charter does not specify unwilling entry. Crouch looked at him. Albus, it doesn't, Dumbledore said. He sounded, Harry thought, like a man acknowledging a truth he'd already known and had been deciding whether to surface. Article 7, as Remus notes, is specifically framed around willing participation. He looked at Harry. Legally, you could withdraw. But? Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes met his. Something passed through them, not manipulation, not exactly. More like the look of a man who was about to say something true that also served his purposes, which was the most complicated kind of true. Someone went to considerable lengths to put you in this tournament, Dumbledore said. Someone with enough understanding of ancient magic to fool a bewitched object. Someone who wanted you here, under specific conditions, at a specific time. He paused. If you withdraw, that person's plan changes. It doesn't end. Harry looked at him for a long moment. You're saying the danger follows me regardless, Harry said. I'm saying that understanding the nature of the trap may require remaining in it long enough to see who's holding the other end of the rope. And you'd like me to be the bait, Harry said. Not angry. Just precise. I'd like you to make an informed choice, Dumbledore said. With your guardian present. Which is what is happening. Harry turned to Remus. Not for permission, for consultation, which was different. Remus knew the difference and had always known it. Remus looked at him with the particular expression that meant he was being honest even though the honesty was uncomfortable. He's not wrong about the danger following you, he said. And there's something to be said for controlled conditions over uncontrolled ones. A pause. But the decision is yours. Entirely. I won't tell you to be brave. I won't tell you this is what your parents would have wanted. I'm telling you that both options carry risk and you're intelligent enough to weigh them yourself. If I stay, Harry said, you stay close. I wasn't planning on leaving. Closer than the defense classroom. I'll have Dumbledore give me something with better access. Dumbledore, at this, made a small sound that was very nearly amused. The tower room above the Ollery is unoccupied. Fine, Harry said. He looked at the room, Crouch's compressed displeasure, McGonagall's careful neutrality, the three champions watching him with recalibrated expressions, the specific weight of a decision that would shape the next 8 months. Then he looked at the goblet, still faintly blue-flamed, inscrutable and ancient. I'll compete, he said. But I want it formally recorded that my entry was non-consensual and that my participation is chosen and not compelled. I want Remus's co-signature on any tournament documentation. And I want access to whatever information Dumbledore has about the intended purpose of my entry. Not later. As we go. He looked at Dumbledore on the last condition. Dumbledore held his gaze for 1 beat. 2. Agreed, he said. Cedric Diggory found him the following morning near the lake, which took a certain amount of intention because the lake at 7 a.m. wasn't a location that suggested accident. He was a Hufflepuff's 6th year with the kind of uncomplicated decency that some people had as their primary quality, not simple, just genuinely oriented toward fairness in a way that was neither performed nor naive. I heard what you said in the hall last night, Cedric said. About not putting your name in. It's true, Harry said. I know. He said it simply. I mean, I could tell. The way you said it. He paused. For what it's worth, I don't think you should be penalized for someone else's choice. Thank you. Harry looked at the lake. Are you going to be good competition? Cedric half smiled. I'm going to try. Good, Harry said. I prefer actual competition to decoration. He glanced at him. The Beauxbatons girl, Fleur Delacour, Cedric said, with the specific careful neutrality of someone managing a reaction. Yes. She'll be formidable. And Crumb. Even more so. Cedric looked at him. You don't seem worried. I'm always worried, Harry said. I've just had a lot of practice doing things while worried. He looked at the water. Whatever the first task is, it'll be dangerous. The tournament charter specifies life-threatening in the actual language. So. He considered. We should both try to know what's coming. Cedric looked at him with the recalibrating quality that Harry had begun to think of as the standard response to being themselves around him. You're suggesting we share information. I'm suggesting that there are at least 4 parties in this tournament and at least one of them already has someone working against me. Leveling information between the actual competitors seems reasonable. Harry looked at him. You're honest. I can tell you're honest. That's useful. You can tell I'm honest, Cedric repeated. Yes. How? The way you said I know about my not entering. You didn't add anything. People who are performing honesty always add something. Harry shrugged. You just said it. Cedric looked at him for a moment. Then he laughed, quietly, with genuine warmth. All right, he said. Information sharing. Agreed. They shook on it, there by the lake in the 7 a.m. cold, and went back to breakfast. Remus moved into the tower room above the Ollery and was in Harry's life at a proximity closer to the cottage years than the standard school year, and Harry noticed that the Hogwarts staff seemed to recalibrate around this, Remus in the hallways more, Remus at meals more present, Remus's defense classes developing a specific additional intensity that the fourth years described to each other as brilliant but slightly terrifying. The first task was dragons. Harry found out 3 days early, through a chain that went, Hagrid to Madame Maxime to Fleur, and simultaneously Dumbledore to Remus to Harry, because Remus had been pressing Dumbledore on the information-sharing agreement with the specific patient persistence that had worn down the Ministry's Wisengamot obstruction over the course of a decade. Dragons, Sirius said, when Harry flooded him that evening. They gave a 14-year-old a dragon. It's a Hungarian horntail, Harry said. Sirius stared at him through the flames. That's the most dangerous breed in Europe. I know. Which is why I'm not planning to fight it. He leaned forward. I'm planning to outfly it. On what? My firebolt. Your firebolt is at the cottage. Sirius, Harry said. I'll bring it tomorrow, Sirius said immediately. Thank you, Harry. The horntail has a 60-foot tail spike range. I know. I've been reading. Harry met his eyes through the floor. I also know they're fast on the ground and slow in a sustained climb, and their fire has a narrow angle of projection, and they don't pursue horizontally for more than 100 yards before returning to the nest. He paused. I've done my homework. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Your father would have just tried to punch the dragon. My father was brave and sometimes not entirely strategic. He was deeply not entirely strategic. He was the least strategic marauder by a considerable margin. A pause. I'm very glad you got some of your mother in you. She'd have built a detailed escape plan, Harry agreed. She'd have built 3. I've built 2, Harry said. I'm working on the 3rd. The morning of the first task, Harry sat in the champion's tent with Cedric and Fleur and Crumb, all of them in various states of preparation. Cedric was reading something. Fleur was doing something to her hair that was practical rather than cosmetic, binding it back in a way that suggested she'd thought about fire. Crumb was still, in the way he was often still, watching the tent entrance with the focus of someone who converted anticipation into concentration. Harry was doing nothing externally. Internally he was running through everything, the layout of the arena, the horntail's behavioral tendencies, the 2 escape plans, the 3rd one he'd settled on at 2 in the morning when the 2nd plan had a flaw he kept finding. Remus came in. He looked at Harry once, the full look, the one that took in everything and communicated the same, and came over. 3rd plan, Harry said quietly. Tell me. If the broom approach fails, if the horntail follows, which she might because horntails are territorial and will pursue aerial targets when provoked, then I go vertical. As high as I can. She won't sustain the climb and I can recover altitude while she returns to nest. Remus thought about this. If you push her too high she may stall and fall on the crowd. Harry nodded. So I angle southeast on the way up, which takes us over the open hillside. No crowd exposure. That's the 3rd plan. That's the 3rd plan. Remus was quiet for a moment. When you get the egg, he said, don't stop to look at it in the arena. Get out of the arena first. I know. I know you know. I'm saying it anyway. Harry looked at him. You're nervous, he said, which he almost never said directly, because Remus's composure was one of the structures of Harry's world and he tried to treat it with appropriate respect. Yes, Remus said simply. I'll be all right. I know you'll be all right. Remus held his gaze. I'm still nervous. Both things are true. Okay, Harry said. He put his hand briefly on Remus's arm. I'll be quick. In and out. Good. Remus straightened. The firebolts outside the tent. I charmed the grip for better traction, wet conditions, in case she breathes, Harry said. Yes. Thank you. Remus left. Crumb, from across the tent, said, your guardian. He trained you? Yes, Harry said. He is, careful. The kind of careful that is not fear. Crumb considered the English for what he meant. It is the careful of someone who knows how much things cost. Harry looked at him. That's very accurate. Crumb nodded once, apparently satisfied. You will be fine today, he said. It wasn't comfort, it was the assessment of a professional looking at another person's preparation and reaching a conclusion. You too, Harry said. When the signal came and Harry walked into the arena and the crowd noise hit him like a physical wall, he felt it all, the noise, the stakes, the horntail's golden eyes fixed on him from across the enclosure, the egg gleaming among her nest stones. He felt his heartbeat doing something vigorous and informative, which was fear, which was information, which meant something was at stake. He summoned the firebolt. It came so fast it was almost violent, snapping through the air from the tent entrance into his hand, and he felt the crowd's reaction change quality when they understood what he was about to do. He was on it before the horntail fully tracked the movement. What followed was 3 minutes and 40 seconds of the best flying he'd ever done. Not because he was performing. Because he had a goal and the tools and the preparation and the specific advantage of being able to think clearly while afraid, which was the thing Remus had been teaching him since he was 11 years old, standing in front of a wardrobe in a defense class. He got the egg. He got out of the arena. He landed in the outfield and the crowd noise was extraordinary, and he stood there breathing hard with the egg under his arm and the firebolt in his hand and the first task done and behind him. From somewhere in the stands, distinctive even in a roar, Sirius's firecracker laugh. The egg was a problem. It screamed when opened, a sound that was genuinely horrible and suggested, on reflection, that it wasn't meant to be opened in open air. Harry figured this out on night 2 of sitting with it in the tower room with Remus, when Remus said, "It's a different medium," and Harry said, "Water," at the same moment Remus said it. He spent 3 sessions at the prefect's bathroom, which Cedric had quietly indicated to him with the air of someone who'd worked this out and was honoring the information-sharing agreement, and the Mermish song translated to, "Come below for what you'll miss," and below meant the lake, and what he'd miss meant, "They'll take something," Harry said, at the kitchen table in Sirius's flat on the Christmas break, map spread again, this time with the lake layout superimposed over what he knew about Merepeople habitation. The second task. They'll take someone and hold them underwater for an hour. Who? Ron asked, from the sofa. He'd been invited for Christmas and accepted with alacrity and had been an excellent presence in the flat for 4 days, easy and comfortable, and treating the strategic sessions as the natural extension of Harry's regular life that they were. People we'd miss, Harry said. Each champion. The person each champion would miss most. They'd take Hermione, Ron said immediately, then colored slightly. I mean, you two are, friends, Harry said firmly. Best friends. He looked at Ron, who was doing something with his expression that was either digestive or emotional. You'd be on the list too. Any of the 3 of you. Could be someone from home, Hermione said. She was in the armchair with the lake diagram, running her finger along depth lines. Could be Remus. Or Sirius. Harry looked at the map. No, he said. They'll take students. Easier to manage the magic for the duration, lower risk of, they won't take an adult guardian. He paused. Probably. Remus, from the kitchen doorway with tea, I've already been in contact with Dumbledore about the second task parameters. He confirmed hostages will be students. A pause. He did not confirm identity, but I've had McGonagall's word that all students used as hostages will be safe for the duration and retrieved regardless of task outcome. You've already done this? Harry said. I've been doing it since October. Remus came fully into the room. While you were navigating the tournament, I was having a separate conversation about safety parameters. Both things at once. He set the tea down. The hostage will be safe. Your only job is to get them and get yourself out within the hour. Harry looked at him. You've already thought 3 tasks ahead. I've thought the whole tournament through, Remus said. I've been thinking about it since the goblet selected your name. He met Harry's eyes. My job is to see what's coming and get ahead of it. Yours is to execute. That's a good division of labor, Harry said. I've refined it over 14 years. You've had a subject. An excellent one. Sirius, from across the room, I'm just going to say that this is the most organized approach to a life-threatening magical competition I've ever witnessed, and I include James's aura training in that assessment. James was not organized, Remus said. James was enthusiastically organized and then immediately distracted, Sirius clarified. A meaningful distinction, Harry agreed. The second task was the lake in February, and Harry went in knowing the layout, the depth, the rough location of the Merepeople settlement, and having spent 2 weeks learning Gillyweed's precise application, which put him in the water breathing for exactly an hour if timed correctly. He found Ron. Ron was standing on the lake bed in the eerie green light with several others, Hermione, a Durmstrang student, a small girl who was clearly Fleur's sister, all of them in a magically induced sleep, suspended in a way that looked uncomfortably like the graves in his boggart and which Harry catalogued and moved past because there was no time and they would be all right. He got Ron free. He looked at the others. He looked at the mere people who were watching him with their spears ready. Fleur wasn't coming. He'd been monitoring the time and the likely approach routes and Fleur wasn't coming. He got the Durmstrang student loose too, keeping half an eye on the mere people, who watched but didn't move. And Fleur's sister. Because the task said you're hostage, not only you're hostage, and he wasn't leaving a child on the lake floor because the rules implied he should. He surfaced with both Ron and the little girl, and Fleur, who had been unable to complete the task due to Grindylows and was standing on the bank in a state of distress, grabbed her sister and said something in French that sounded like it had the word brave in it, and Harry trod water and tried to remember how lungs worked. The judges debated the rules application for 40 minutes. Harry sat wrapped in a towel on the bank and ate a conjured sandwich that Remus had produced from somewhere and drank tea that Sirius had arrived with in a charmed flask, because Sirius considered Hogsmeade close enough to Hogwarts that any task warranted his actual physical presence. The judges awarded him 45 points, which was second highest. He could live with second. You got someone else's hostage, Sirius said. She was 8, Harry said. I'm not criticizing. I'm admiring. She was 8, Harry repeated, as if this were the complete answer, which it was. The problem with the third task was the maze. Not the maze itself. Harry could navigate a maze, had prepared for exactly this type of problem, had spent weeks with Hermione working through a systematic approach to magical obstacle navigation. The problem was what Remus had identified quietly and early, back in October, about the person holding the other end of the rope. Someone wanted you in the tournament under specific conditions at a specific time. Third task. The maze. A portkey at the center. Remus had come to this conclusion in March, 3 weeks before the task, and had sat Harry down in the tower room with the specificity and precision of someone who had run through the logic enough times to be certain. The portkey is the mechanism, Remus said. Getting you into the tournament was never about the tasks. The tasks are noise. The portkey at the center is what they wanted, a way to transport you to a specific location without your consent. He paused. Whoever put your name in the goblet needed you to win. Or at least reach the center. Harry sat with this. Moody, he said. Remus was very still. I've been watching him all year, Harry said. The way he watches me is different from the way he watches other students. And there are things that don't fit. Specific things. The way he described unforgivables in class, not with the distance of a teacher. With the proximity of someone who uses them. He paused. And Barty Crouch Sr. hasn't been to a task since October. Crouch went missing, Remus said carefully. I know. I've been following the ministry reports. Harry looked at him. Moody is not Moody. The silence between them had the quality of two people arriving at the same place from different directions and recognizing each other on the road. Polyjuice, Remus said. That's what I think. If you're right, if I'm right, then someone in this castle has been managing the tournament from inside, keeping me in it, preparing the portkey, working toward getting me to the graveyard. Harry's voice was even. And the real Moody is somewhere in this castle. I'll go to Dumbledore tonight, Remus said. Yes, Harry said. And I'll go to the task. Harry, I'll go to the task, Harry said again, because withdrawing now alerts whoever's managing this. They'll have a contingency. The portkey might not need me to reach the center, might just need me in the maze. He met Remus's eyes. We go to Dumbledore tonight, you make the case, he investigates Moody, and you're outside the maze on the evening of the task. Not in the stands. Outside. As close as they'll allow you. As close as they'll allow me, Remus repeated. Or closer. Closer, Harry confirmed. If something goes wrong with the port key, if I disappear, you follow immediately. You have Dumbledore's pensive access for Moody's memories, which means you'll have the coordinates within minutes. Remus looked at him for a long time. When did you work all of this out? Over the last month, Harry said. Bit by bit. He paused. I knew you'd have part of it. I knew you'd fill in what I missed. I was waiting for the right moment to put it together. And this is the right moment. 2 weeks before the task, yes. Harry leaned forward. Dumbledore tonight. Then we prepare. They went to Dumbledore that evening, together, because Remus had stopped presenting Harry's guardian and Harry as two separate parties a long time ago. They were a unit and Dumbledore knew it and treated it accordingly, which was to say he listened to both of them with the full attention he brought to things that he'd already partially suspected and was being shown the complete picture of. He was quiet for longer than usual when they finished. Alastair, he said finally, more to himself than to them. The real Moody is almost certainly in the castle, Harry said. Trunk, probably. The person impersonating him would need regular polyjuice access to the source. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Something in his face was doing the thing it did on the rare occasions he was genuinely surprised, not wrong-footed, because Dumbledore was almost never wrong-footed, but surprised in the way of a man who had expected a capable student and found a capable colleague. You've grown up, he said, which was the same thing Remus had said 2 years ago and meant the same thing indifferently. I had good help, Harry said. He glanced at Remus beside him. The best. Dumbledore looked between them. Then he stood, with the specific deliberateness of a man with a task. I'll see to Alastair tonight. And the task? Remus asked. The task proceeds, Dumbledore said. For the same reasons Harry articulated. He looked at Harry. You're remarkably comfortable holding the course of something dangerous. I know what I'm doing, Harry said. And I know what you're doing. And I know what the person impersonating Moody is doing. He stood. 3 sets of information. We've got 2 of them. That's enough to manage the 3rd. He went back to his dormitory and slept 7 hours and ate a full breakfast in the morning and spent the day before the task doing things that were not about the task, played chess with Ron, helped Neville with a herbology problem, sat with Hermione at the lake in the afternoon because the weather had turned warm and there was value in ordinary things before extraordinary ones. Cedric found him in the evening, an hour before the task. Ready? Cedric said. Yes, Harry said. You? Nervous. Good, Harry said. Means you're paying attention. Cedric smiled. If something happens in there, we help each other, Harry said immediately. Whatever the rules say. We help each other. Cedric nodded. Agreed. They walked to the entrance of the maze together, torchlight and the smell of cut grass and the particular sky quality of June evenings in Scotland, and Harry looked back once at the crowd. Remus was not in the stands. He was standing at the perimeter barrier, 20 feet from the maze entrance, in his teaching robes with his wand in his hand and his expression set to the particular calibration that meant he was ready for anything and had planned for everything and was still nervous anyway. Harry held his gaze for one moment. Long enough. Then he looked at the maze entrance, and the goblet's blue flame, and the night ahead, and walked forward. The hedges closed behind him. He found the Triwizard Cup in 41 minutes. He'd navigated 3 obstacles, helped Cedric past a boggart that had taken him by surprise, and outrun something in the east section that he'd identified as an acromantula and which had been too large for the narrow path to track effectively, and when he stood in the clearing at the center with the cup gleaming on its plinth he thought, with great clarity, it's a portkey. He looked at it. He thought, Remus is outside. Dumbledore has had 8 hours. The real Moody is free. Whoever is impersonating Moody is no longer impersonating Moody. He thought, if I touch it, I go to the graveyard. If I go to the graveyard, I face whatever Voldemort's current form is. If I don't touch it, they have a contingency. He thought, I am not afraid of Voldemort. He thought, but I'm also not stupid. Cedric came through the hedge from the north path, breathing hard, and stopped when he saw Harry standing over the cup. It's a portkey, Harry said. Cedric looked at it. Looked at Harry. Where does it go? Somewhere Voldemort is waiting. The word landed in the maze clearing. How do you know? Cedric asked. Because someone put my name in the goblet to get me here, Harry said. Because the tournament was never about the tasks. He paused. Remus figured it out. I confirmed it. We told Dumbledore. He looked at Cedric. We have backup. Okay, Cedric said. He said it with the quality Harry had first identified in him by the lake in September, the uncomplicated orientation toward doing the right thing. What do we do? Harry looked at the cup. We go, he said. Together. Backup is ready. We know what we're walking into. That's more than anyone facing Voldemort has had in 20 years. Cedric looked at him. You're not afraid. I'm afraid, Harry said. I told you. I've just been practicing this for a long time. He reached out his hand. Cedric took his other wrist. They touched the cup together. The world compressed. Chapter 6, Not a weapon, not a sacrifice. The graveyard arrived like a fist. Cold air, dark sky, and the specific silence of a place that had been waiting. Harry landed on his feet. He'd practiced landing from portkey displacement, had done it 30 times with Remus in the cottage garden until it was muscle memory, and Cedric landed beside him a half-second later, less steady but upright. Harry had his wand out before the world stopped spinning. The graveyard was old. Yew trees and leaning headstones and the smell of cold earth, a church visible at the far end with dark windows. A hill in the middle distance with a dark manor house sitting on it like a bruise. Little Hangleton, which Harry knew because he'd read everything Dumbledore had shared under the information agreement, and one of those things was a file on Voldemort's history that included the village where his father's family had lived. He knew where he was. He also knew, immediately, that they were not alone. Someone's here, he said quietly to Cedric. I can't see, don't look for a person. Look for movement that doesn't fit the wind. Harry was already turning, reading the graveyard systematically, the way Remus had taught him to read rooms. There. Between the third and fourth row of stones. Something's being carried. A figure emerged. Short, hooded, carrying a bundle wrapped in dark cloth that moved slightly, irregularly, in a way that made Harry's skin register something before his conscious mind caught up. He knew what was in that bundle. Not a person. Something that had been a person, or was becoming one. The remnant. Wormtail, Harry said. The figure stopped. Peter, Harry said. I can see you. The hood came down. Peter Pettigrew, thinner than Manchester, diminished in ways that went beyond the physical, with the expression of someone who had been walking toward this moment for months and had not once considered stopping, looked at Harry with something that was not quite surprise and not quite fear and was entirely guilt. Harry, he said. We keep meeting like this, Harry said. You always look like you'd prefer not to. Cedric, beside him, what is that? In the cloth. Don't let it touch you, Harry said. Stay close to me. Wormtail raised his wand. I'm sorry, he said. And the terrible thing, Harry thought, was that he meant it. The man who had betrayed his parents and caused everything that followed and then run for 12 years and then gone back to the thing he'd run from, he meant the apology with whatever was left of himself that was capable of meaning things. I know, Harry said. Do it anyway and it won't matter. Stupefy, he said. At the same moment Wormtail said something else, and the two spells crossed in the dark air between them and Harry's hit and Wormtail went down. Not dead. Down. Cedric stared at him. Yes, Harry said. Give me a moment. He looked at the bundle, which was on the ground where Wormtail had dropped it. It was moving with more intention now, something aware inside it, something that had felt Wormtail go down and understood what that meant. Harry felt the scar on his forehead register this awareness like a frequency, not pain, not the blinding agony that some part of his childhood reading had suggested, but recognition, the way two tuning forks respond to each other across a room. "What is that?" Cedric asked again, quieter. "The reason we were brought here," Harry said. He looked at it without looking away. "Voldemort's current form. A remnant. He needs a body. That's what tonight was for, the ritual, the rebirthing. He needs blood and bone and flesh, and he needed me specifically because," he paused. "Because my blood has properties that serve his purposes." "Your blood?" "Yes." He looked at Cedric. "Which is why we're not staying long enough for him to get it." He needed Remus. He needed Remus about 40 seconds ago, actually, but Remus couldn't come until he knew where to come, which was why Harry had done the thing he'd agreed on with Remus in the tower room 2 weeks ago, had let a very small piece of his wand work leave a specific magical signature as they'd left the maze, the kind of targeted beacon that Remus had taught him 3 years ago for exactly this kind of situation. "If you're ever taken somewhere against your will," Remus had said, in the cottage kitchen with a cup of tea and the absolute pragmatism of someone who had raised a child marked by a prophecy, "send this. I'll find you." It was the equivalent of dropping a stone in water. Not a spell, more like a thought with magical weight, a specific frequency that Remus's detection charm would read. He'd send it the moment the portkey landed. He looked at the bundle. The bundle looked back, in the way things look back when they don't have eyes. "How long do we have?" Cedric asked. "However long we hold position," Harry said. "We don't run and we don't engage. We hold." He moved so that a large headstone was at his back. "Come here. Don't expose your flanks." Cedric moved beside him. To his credit, he'd stopped asking questions that weren't useful and was doing the thing Harry was doing, which was reading the graveyard for secondary threats. "There's nothing else here," Cedric said. "Just Wormtail and, not nothing," Harry said. "Look at the yew tree." The yew tree was moving. Not in wind, differently, specifically, the way something moves when it's not the tree doing the moving but something in the tree. Shadows gathering, quality of the air thickening. The bundle started to make a sound. "Don't listen to it," Harry said. "It's going to try to, it'll try to use the sound." He'd read about this. Remnant forms of severely diminished magical beings could generate compulsive frequencies. "Look at me. Eyes on me." Cedric looked at him. "Good," Harry said. "Keep looking at me." The sound intensified. Harry felt it at the base of his skull, an insistent pull that was not pain but was pressure, something tugging at his attention, trying to redirect it, and he thought, information. This is what remnant Voldemort feels like. File it. He filed it. "Harry," Cedric said. "I know." "Don't, no," Cedric said. "Behind you." Harry dropped low before he turned, which was the right instinct. The curse that came from his left passed through where his head had been and hit the headstone and left a crater. He came up already moving, rolling to the right, and saw the second figure, black-robed, silver-masked, emerging from behind the church wall. A Death Eater. Not Wormtail, someone else. A contingency. Of course there was a contingency. Harry had known there would be a contingency. He cast a shield charm that was wide enough to cover Cedric as well, the kind of broad-spectrum shield that required more power but covered more ground, which Remus had specifically developed an exercise for, which Harry had specifically practiced until it was automatic. The curse hit the shield and scattered. The Death Eater cast again, 3 in rapid succession. Harry deflected the first 2 and the third he let hit the shield, which held, and threw back a stunning hex that was slightly wide. The Death Eater was competent, moving laterally, not committing to a position, trained, or experienced, or both. "Shield stays up," Harry said to Cedric. "Don't move outside it." "I need my hands." "What are you doing?" Cedric asked, with the tone of someone who had signed up for a competition and ended up in a war and was managing this with extraordinary composure. Figuring out who else is coming, Harry said, and cast a hominum revelio across the full graveyard. 3 signatures. The Death Eater. Wormtail unconscious. And the bundle, which registered as, not quite human, not quite not, a signature that flickered at the edge of the charm's range like something trying to exist in a frequency it wasn't fully occupying. 3, Harry said. We can work with 3. He looked at the Death Eater, who had stopped moving and was watching him from behind a headstone. Waiting, Harry said quietly. Why are you waiting? The Death Eater was waiting because they'd been instructed to wait. Which meant the bundle was the priority, which meant the Death Eater was a guardian, not a combatant, and the waiting was because engaging Harry too aggressively risked damaging him before the ritual. They needed him functional. Which meant they needed him contained but not harmed, which meant their options were limited, which meant Harry had more room than the presence of a Death Eater should theoretically allow. They won't curse me hard, he told Cedric. They need me for the ritual. That's an advantage. What advantage? They'll just take you. They have to get through the shield to take me, Harry said. And I'm not dropping the shield. He looked at the bundle. And neither of us is touching that. The bundle spoke. It was not Voldemort's voice, not yet, not in this form, but it was something, a sound that was concentrated intention without body, and what it said was Harry's name. No, Harry said, simply, out loud, to the graveyard at large. The Death Eater moved. Harry was already casting, a trip jinx low along the ground and a blasting hex at the headstone the Death Eater was using for cover, not to hit them but to remove the cover, and when the Death Eater stumbled Harry followed it immediately with an impediment jinx that caught them mid-step and froze the movement. They didn't go down but they staggered, badly, and Harry hit them with a stunning hex while they were staggered and that was enough. 2 down. The bundle made a sound that was not a word and that Harry felt in the scar on his forehead with the resonance of 2 things that were, against all natural law, connected. I know what you are, Harry said to it. To him. To the remnant. I know what you did. I know what you're trying to do tonight. He kept his wand level and his breathing even. And I want you to understand something. The graveyard was still. My name is Harry Potter, he said. My mother was Lily Potter. My father was James Potter. I was raised by Remus Lupin and Sirius Black and I know who I am and where I come from. And I am not afraid of you. He paused. I know there's a prophecy that says neither of us can live while the other survives. I've known it since I was 6 years old. I've had 10 years to think about what it means. He looked at the bundle. And what I've decided it means is that you won't survive. Not because I was born to kill you. Not because of prophecy. Because you chose to destroy everything good you encountered and that is a choice that has consequences, and I'm one of them. The bundle said his name again. Different now, more coherent, more itself, something rebuilding in the cloth with the intention of the man who had once been Tom Riddle and had dismantled himself in the process of trying to be immortal. You can't do the ritual without Wormtail, Harry said. And Wormtail is unconscious. And I'm not giving you my blood voluntarily. And I'm not leaving. He looked at the bundle steadily. So here's where we are. A crack of apparition. Harry's head came up. Remus landed 15 feet away with his wand out and his robes marked with the specific kind of dust that meant he'd come through somewhere fast and not entirely cleanly. He looked at Harry first, the quick full-body assessment that parents do when children are in danger, checking for injury, for blood, for wrong movement, and Harry raised one hand, fine. Remus's eyes moved to the bundle, and his expression did something specific and absolute. Harry, he said. 2 down, Harry said. Wormtail and a Death Eater. The bundle is Voldemort's remnant. The ritual hasn't happened, I prevented the first step. Remus looked at Wormtail. Then at the Death Eater. Then at the bundle. Then Dumbledore arrived. Crack. 3 more cracks in rapid succession, horrors, recognizable by the coordinated landing pattern that Moody had apparently drilled into them even in retirement, spreading immediately to cover the perimeter. Cedric exhaled. It was the most sound he'd made in 5 minutes. "Well done," Harry said to him. "Seriously. You were very steady." "I was terrified," Cedric said. "I know. That's what I meant." Dumbledore crossed the graveyard in 12 strides and stood in front of the bundle with an expression that was not afraid and was not triumphant and was something much older than either. He looked at it for a long moment. "Tom," he said, very quietly. The bundle made a sound. "It's done," Dumbledore said. "Whatever was planned tonight is finished." He cast something, not a simple spell, something that took 60 seconds and had the quality of a work that had been prepared in advance, layered and architectural, and when it was done the bundle was still and the frequency Harry had been feeling in his scar went quiet. Not gone, but contained. Bounded. One of the Aurors, a woman Harry didn't recognize, came to Dumbledore's side and conferred quietly. Dumbledore listened, nodded, and looked at Harry. "You sent the beacon," he said. "Immediately on arrival." "Yes," Harry said. "How long had you planned that?" 2 weeks, Harry said. "Remus taught me the beacon 3 years ago. We agreed on the activation protocol when we worked out the portkey." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The look again, the one that was genuine surprise from a man who was rarely genuinely surprised. "I owe you an apology," he said. Harry looked at him. He hadn't expected that. He was experienced enough to know that the unexpected thing deserved real attention. "For Privet Drive," Dumbledore said. "For the choice I made on that doorstep 13 years ago. I believed I was protecting you." He paused. "I was making a decision that wasn't mine to make. Remus was right. I've known he was right for several years and haven't said so." The graveyard was quiet around them, the Aurors working the perimeter, Cedric sitting on a headstone with the expression of someone letting adrenaline drain. "I know you believed it," Harry said. "I've always known that." He thought about it honestly, because the moment deserved honesty. "You thought like a strategist. Remus thought like a person who loved me. Those aren't always the same thing." "No," Dumbledore said. "They are not." "The prophecy," Harry said. "The neither can live part." "Is it, was tonight?" "Not yet," Dumbledore said. "Tonight was an attempt to restore him fully. We've prevented it. The remnant is contained. But he is not destroyed." His eyes held Harry's. "That will require, the Horcruxes," Harry said. Dumbledore went entirely still. Harry said, Sirius identified the term in October. He found it in his family's library, in a text that described soul-splitting magic. "I cross-referenced it with everything you'd shared about Voldemort's history and the timeline of his diminishment and the fact that he didn't die at Godric's Hollow when a killing curse rebounded." He paused. "He split his soul. Multiple times. That's why he didn't die. That's what needs destroying." The silence stretched. "When were you going to tell me?" Harry asked. Not accusingly. Genuinely curious about the arithmetic of Dumbledore's planning. "6th year," Dumbledore said. "I intended to tell you in your 6th year. That's 2 more years." "Yes." Harry considered this. "How many are there?" Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment Harry could see the calculation happening, the long-standing habit of measuring information against risk, of deciding what a person was ready for, of playing the board. And he could see it losing. 7, Dumbledore said. He intended 7. "How many have been destroyed?" "The diary. 2 years ago, in the Chamber of Secrets, which you were not involved in," he paused. "Actually, no. You were involved in solving the lead that Ginny Weasley used to. I told Ron to tell Ginny to tell you what she remembered about the diary," Harry said. "Yes. I was involved. He waited. So 1. The diary. 1, Dumbledore confirmed. 6 remaining. Possibly 5. There is evidence that one may have been destroyed accidentally by Voldemort himself in the process of his diminishment. Dumbledore looked at the contained bundle. I have been researching. I have locations for 3. You'll share them, Harry said. When you have the full picture. You'll share them with me and Remus together. It wasn't a request. But it wasn't aggressive. It was simply the way Harry Potter framed things that were going to happen, as facts rather than demands, because the confidence of his expectation made negotiation beside the point. Yes, Dumbledore said. I will. Remus had come to stand beside Harry, and Harry felt his presence the way he always felt it, solid and specific and there, and didn't look at him but was aware of him the way you're aware of north when you have a compass. Tonight, Remus said to Dumbledore, the tournament is over. Yes, Dumbledore said. The tournament is formally suspended pending investigation. All champions will be awarded equivalent completion status. The cup and the prize money, the money to the Diggory family, Harry said. Cedric won, as far as I'm concerned. He competed on proper terms. I was a target, not a contestant. Cedric, from his headstone, said, You don't have to, I want to, Harry said. He looked at Cedric directly. You were steady tonight. In a graveyard, in the dark, with a Death Eater and a Voldemort remnant and me telling you not to move, you were steady. That's worth more than a cup. He paused. The money is yours. Cedric looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded, with the simple directness that was his consistent quality. Thank you. Thank you, Harry said. For going in with me. Remus didn't speak to him until they were out of the graveyard. The Aurors had it handled, the contained remnant, the unconscious Wormtail, the Death Eater, the forensic spellwork that would take days and generate reports that would circulate through the Ministry in ways that would be, Harry anticipated, extremely interesting politically. Dumbledore was coordinating. Cedric was being seen to by a Medowitch who had arrived with the second Auror contingent. Harry and Remus stood at the edge of the graveyard, near the yew trees, where the grass gave way to a country lane. Well, Remus said. Well, Harry agreed. Silence for a moment. The kind that was full rather than empty. Your blood stayed your own, Remus said. Yes. The ritual didn't happen. No. The remnant is contained. Yes. You're unharmed. I'm fine. Harry looked at him. I was always going to be fine. You weren't necessarily, I was, Harry said. Firmly, not to argue but to be clear. I had the beacon. I had the shield. I had the preparation. I wasn't going in unprepared and hoping. I was going in prepared and executing. Remus looked at him for a long moment. The country lane was dark and the graveyard sounds were behind them and the night was doing what June nights did in England, which was remain not entirely dark even at midnight, a faint blue quality at the edges of the sky. The beacon worked, Remus said. Of course it worked. You taught me how to cast it. It takes approximately 3 seconds to cast correctly under pressure. I cast it in 2, Harry said. Remus made a sound that was trying very hard not to be what it was, which was a laugh that had relief in it. He put his hand on the back of Harry's head briefly, the gesture he'd had since Harry was small, the "you're here, I know you're here" gesture, and then dropped it. The Horcruxes, Remus said. You heard. I heard everything. 7, Harry said. Possibly 5 to go. He looked at the sky. That's the next thing. That's what comes now. Yes, Remus said. After the school year ends. After the summer. Together. Together, Harry said. You, me, Sirius. And probably Hermione and Ron, because Hermione will find 3 of them through research alone and Ron will work out the logic of the remaining 2 and I'll be the one who actually has to go get them, which seems to be the established pattern. The established pattern, Remus said. Is that what we're calling it? I think it's accurate. Remus looked at him. Something in his face was doing the thing it did when he was full of something he was deciding how to express, which in Remus was a process that took time because he was precise about language, had always been precise, believed that saying things accurately was a form of respect for the person you were saying them to. James would have been proud, he said. Tonight. All of it. The tournament, the maze, the graveyard. All of this year. He paused. He asked me to raise you brave and good. He said you'd be extraordinary. He looked at the sky the way Harry had looked at it, that June blue. He was right. He was exactly right. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, you raised me, Moony. You raised me brave and good. That's on you. On both of us, Remus said. On both of us, Harry agreed. Sirius was at Hogwarts by 2 in the morning. He'd been in Hogsmeade when the second Auror team had gone through, had apparently followed them at speed, through what channels or by what method was unclear and he wasn't explaining, and by the time Harry came through the school entrance hall with Remus, Sirius was there. He looked at Harry the way he'd been looking at Harry since the boy was 5 years old in a garden, which was with the specific intensity of someone who had lost James Potter and been given James Potter's son as both consolation and continuation and found, over 14 years, that Harry was entirely his own person and also entirely his family and that both things were simultaneously true and consistently miraculous. All right? Sirius said. All right, Harry said. Sirius grabbed him in a hug that had no restraint in it whatsoever, which was standard Sirius, and Harry returned it with the same absence of restraint, which was standard Harry, and Remus stood 2 feet away and watched them with the expression of a man who had built this from a Surrey doorstep and a ruined cottage and a legal brief at Gringotts at midnight and the sheer unglamorous stubborn force of daily love, and who was, in this moment, entirely at peace with everything. It had cost. When Sirius let go he held Harry at arm's length. Wormtail. Unconscious in ministry custody, Harry said. He'll be properly tried this time. Good. Something passed through Sirius's face. And Dumbledore said, contained. Not destroyed. Not yet. Harry looked at him steadily. There's more work. We know what the work is. We'll do it. When? Not tonight, Remus said firmly. Tonight is done. Sirius looked at him. Agreed. He looked at Harry. Are you hungry? I could absolutely eat something. There's a place in Hogsmeade that does exceptional, Sirius, Remus said. It's 2 in the morning. They're definitely still open. Why would they be? Because Hogsmeade caters to people with irregular schedules and strong feelings about late-night food. He looked at Harry with the expression he'd had since the moment Harry was 5 years old asking his first very good question. Aren't you hungry? Harry thought about it. He'd been in a graveyard 40 minutes ago, had contained a Death Eater and a disembodied Dark Lord and a situation that could have gone 17 different ways, had held his nerve and executed his preparation and come out the other side. He was absolutely hungry. Yes, he said. Obviously, Sirius said, and turned toward the doors with the energy of someone who had been waiting for this particular note to end on. They sat in the back corner of the Hogsmeade pub that was indeed still open, because Sirius was occasionally right about things, and ate at 2:30 in the morning with the quality of people who have done something hard and are now allowing themselves the ordinary comfort of food and warmth in each other. Harry ate his way through the entire left side of the menu and drank 2 butterbeers and sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling with the comfortable emptiness that comes after sustained tension releases. Horcruxes, Sirius said. Tomorrow, Remus said. Not details. Just, Sirius looked at his drink. Dumbledore was sitting on that. He was going to tell me in 6th year, Harry said. He said. 6th year, Sirius repeated. 2 more years. 2 more years of Harry not knowing the full shape of the thing he's in. He thought he was protecting me, Harry said. Does that make it? No, Harry said. It doesn't make it the right call. But I understand the instinct. He paused. The difference between him and you, he looked at Remus. Between him and us, is that he protected me from information instead of with it. You always thought the information was the protection. Remus nodded. And you were right, Harry said. Tonight. If I hadn't known about the Horcruxes, I wouldn't have known how to think about the ritual. If I hadn't known about the graveyard, he stopped. Every piece of knowledge I had tonight was something you gave me. The beacon. The shield. The graveyard name. The remnant theory. All of it. He looked at both of them. I want you to know that I know that. You would have been all right regardless, Sirius said. I would have been in more danger regardless, Harry corrected. I am capable. I know what I can do. But capability without knowledge is just luck, and luck runs out. He met Sirius's eyes. You and Remus didn't raise me on luck. You raised me on preparation. That's what tonight was. Sirius looked at him for a long moment, something happening behind his eyes that was layered and complicated, grief and love and pride and the ghost of James Potter who had sat in the back corner of pubs very much like this one and said things that were better than they had any right to be and made everyone around him feel like the world was a reasonable place. James would have something insufferably good to say right now, Sirius said. He always did, Remus said. I never worked out how he did that. Sirius looked at Harry. You do it too. Harry looked at the table. Then he looked up, and his eyes, Lily's eyes, all the way down, had something in them that was warm and a little undone and entirely his own. I had good teachers, he said. Both of them. Just in different ways. The pub was quiet around them. The barman was dozing at the end of the bar. Through the window the Hogsmeade High Street was empty and dark and the Scottish hills were just visible against the sky. Remus looked at the table. At the 2 butterbeers and the plates and the evening paper he'd picked up from the bar and hadn't read and wasn't going to read tonight because there would be enough reading of official things in the morning. He looked at Harry, who was going to eat the last of the chips without asking because that was always what happened. He looked at Sirius, who was drawing something on a napkin. He drew when he was thinking, had always drawn when he was thinking, it was one of the consistent things, one of the things that had survived Azkaban. He thought about November 1st, 1981. A ruined cottage. A sleeping child in a basket on a doorstep. A very old man with very good reasons that weren't good enough. The cold specific weight of a lockbox with a stag on the keyhole, and inside it a letter that said, "You absolute idiot, I told you to check on us sooner. I love you. Read this." He had read it. He had walked to the end of Privet Drive and turned the corner and stood in the shadow of an oak tree and looked at a 14-month-old who had grabbed his finger with both hands and held on. He had said, "Hold on, then." And Harry had. And here they were. Here they were. The ministry was, as Harry had anticipated, extremely interesting in the days that followed. The formal report on the graveyard went through 3 drafts and a Wisengamot emergency session and a press cycle that Remus managed with the calm of someone who had been managing press attention on Harry's behalf since 1985. The contained remnant was in ministry custody under the highest available security, insufficient, Remus noted in his formal submission to the security committee, based on precedent, but sufficient for the immediate term. The Horcrux investigation was classified at the highest level, with Dumbledore leading and Harry designated as an active participant, not a resource, not a symbol, but an active participant with full information access, which Dumbledore had agreed to and put in writing and signed in front of witnesses. Remus had kept a copy. Obviously. Bartemius Crouch Jr. was identified as the Polyjuiced Moody, as Harry had suspected, found in the trunk, actual Alastor Moody freed, the whole trail of how and why and who authorized what laid bare in a Wisengamot inquiry that made the original Sirius Black affair look well organized by comparison. Alastor Moody himself, restored and furious in the way of someone who had been replaced without knowing, spent a week at St. Mungo's and then came to Hogwarts and sat in Remus's office for 4 hours, and they emerged from that conversation with the air of two people who had agreed on something significant. Moody joined the Horcrux effort in July. "He's terrifying," Sirius said, about this. "He's brilliant," Remus said. "Both," Harry said. "Definitely both." The Death Eater from the graveyard was identified as Augustus Rookwood, which opened another layer of investigation into Ministry infiltration that would occupy the Aura Department for the better part of a year, and which Harry followed in the papers with the focus of someone filing information for later use. Wormtail's second trial was in August, and Millicent Burrows, who had an iron sense of professional completeness, attended as an observer and filed a report afterwards that said simply, "Satisfactory conclusion. The record is now accurate." His sentence was extended based on the graveyard evidence. He went back to Azkaban without looking at Harry, which Harry thought was probably the most self-aware choice Peter Pettigrew had made in his adult life. The summer was the summer after all of it, which meant it was different from previous summers in specific and irreducible ways. It was also, and this was a fact Harry held with deliberate care, because facts of this kind require deliberate care, deeply ordinary in the ways that mattered. The cottage. The lock. Remus's books. Sirius's cooking, which had improved substantially over the years in ways that still managed to produce results that were sometimes extraordinary and occasionally alarming. Ron arrived in July with his chess set and his easy presence, and Hermione arrived 2 days later with a stack of books that was aggressively reasonable and a list of Horcrux-related research questions that she'd already started annotating. Neville came too, for a week, and brought his grandmother's herbology almanac because he had a theory about certain magical plants and their historical association with concealment magic that turned out to be more relevant to the Horcrux research than anyone had expected. Harry sat on the lock bank one afternoon in late July with Ron, both of them not doing anything specific, the sun on the water and the hills solid in the distance. "Weird year," Ron said. "Yes," Harry said. "Dragons, mere people, a graveyard." "In that order." "Did I mention the dragons?" "You mentioned the dragons." "Because the dragons were, I know," Harry said. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you all right?" "Actually." Harry thought about it. The proper version of the question deserved the proper version of the answer. "I'm all right," he said. "Actually. I know what's coming. I know more about it than I did a year ago. I know what needs doing." He paused. "I'm not afraid of it." "I know you're not afraid of it," Ron said. "That's not always reassuring, you know." "Fair," Harry said. "I mean, I believe you. I just wonder sometimes if you should be more afraid. I don't know. Something." Ron picked up a flat stone and skimmed it across the lock with the expertise of 6 years of practice. "I just want you to be all right." "I know," Harry said. "You always have." He looked at Ron. "That's why it works. You and Hermione. You don't need me to be the thing everyone else needs me to be. You just need me to be okay." Ron looked faintly embarrassed, which was his standard response to accurate emotional observation. "Yeah, well," he said. "Obviously." Harry skimmed a stone. It bounced 5 times. 6 Horcruxes, he said quietly. 5, probably, Ron said. "You've been reading." "Hermione's been talking," Ron said. "Same result." He looked at the water. "We'll figure it out." "I know," Harry said. "Together," Ron said. Whatever it is. We're in it." "I know," Harry said again. And he did know, in the way he'd known things that mattered since he was old enough to know things, not with anxiety, not with performance, but with the settled certainty of someone who had been built, carefully and lovingly, to receive exactly this kind of truth. He'd been built for this. Not as a weapon. Not as a sacrifice. Not as a symbol or a piece on a board or a name on a prophetic scroll. As a person. James and Lily's son. Remus's ward. Sirius's godson. Ron and Hermione's friend. Neville's friend. Cedric's ally by a graveyard in the dark. A person who knew who he was and where he came from and what he valued and what he was willing to do, and who had never, not once, not in a Surrey doorstep alternative, not in a cupboard under the stairs, not in the dark and hidden version of his life that a very old man had almost constructed for him, been asked to be less than that. That was the thing. That had always been the thing. He picked up another stone and turned it over in his hand, feeling the weight of it, the specific smooth ordinary fact of it. Then he skimmed it across the lock, and it bounced 7 times, and Ron said, 7, with the surprise of genuine appreciation, and Harry laughed, bright and free and entirely himself, and the afternoon went on. That evening, with the light going down and the lock doing its nightly gold-to-silver routine, Harry found Remus on the garden wall. His usual spot. The spot where they'd sat when Harry was 5 years old wanting to be close. He sat beside him. They looked at the water. The Horcruxes, Harry said. We start researching properly in September, Remus said. Dumbledore will share the location intelligence by October. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Remus said, it's still summer. Harry looked at the lock. At the hills going dark at their edges, the sky doing its long northern reluctance to let go of light. Somewhere inside the cottage Sirius was making something in the kitchen and Hermione was arguing a research point with Neville and Ron was making the sound of someone who had lost another chess game and found this objectionable. He thought about a graveyard in June and a beacon that had worked and a shield charm learned in repetition and a letter that said, make him know he's loved, make him know who his parents were, make him brave and good. He thought about Remus reading that letter on a nursery floor at Godric's Hollow with a 14-month-old in his lap. He thought about a Gringotts office at midnight and a will and a doorstep and the specific decision that everything had hinged on, made by one grieving man who could have walked away and didn't. Who had not left without him. Moony, he said. Thank you. For the doorstep. Remus turned to look at him. I know you've never made me feel like I needed to say it, Harry said. That's part of what I'm thanking you for. He met his eyes. But I want to say it. I know what you chose that night. I know what it cost. I know what you built. He looked at the lock. I know who I am because you decided I should know. Remus was quiet for a moment that had the quality of the lock, deep and still and full of things that didn't need to be said out loud to be true. James was right, he said finally. In the letter. He said you'd be extraordinary. He looked at Harry. He was understating it. Harry smiled. The real one, the full one, not managed or deployed but just present the way good things are present when nothing is blocking them. He'd have been insufferable about it, Harry said. Absolutely, Remus agreed. Would have told everyone. Everyone he ever met. Repeatedly. In detail. With demonstrations. Harry's smile widened. Good thing he had you to be reasonable. Someone had to be. Still does, Harry said. Still does, Remus agreed, and there was something in the words, the simple agreement, the still in it, the persistence of it across 15 years and a war and a graveyard and everything that was still coming, that was better than any declaration, any formal statement, any documented legal claim filed with Gringotts at midnight. Just, still does. Just, still here. The light finished with the lock and went dark, and inside the cottage the sounds of 3 people arguing about chess and research continued with the comfortable permanence of things that had always been, and the hills held their solid shape against the sky, and the water went silver and then dark and then simply itself, present and unchanged. Harry Potter, not a weapon, not a sacrifice, not a symbol on a doorstep or a child in a cupboard or a piece on anyone's board, Harry Potter, entirely and specifically himself, sat on a garden wall in Scotland next to the man who had chosen him and looked at the night and was not afraid of anything it contained. He was ready. He had always been ready. The difference was that now he knew exactly who had made him so.